Call to order the November 8th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbie?
Here.
Commissioner Buckley?
Here.
Commissioner Castro?
Here.
Commissioner Kroll? Commissioner Neer?
Here.
Commissioner Wright?
Here.
Chair Atherton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Next up is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections? If none, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
So moved by Barbie.
Second.
Second by Neer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Approval of the October 18th, 2017 minutes. Any additions, deletions, or corrections? If none, I'll take a motion.
Moved. So moved.
So moved by Buckley.
Second.
Second by Barbie. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. This is the public participation portion, say that 3 times fast, of the meeting, where we allow the public to come up and speak on anything that is not part of the agenda. If there's anyone that would like to come to the podium, you're welcome to. Okay, there is not, so we will move on to new business, which is the continued public hearing on a petition by Central States Tower 2 LLC, represented by Richard Connor Riley, for approval of a special use permit for a 140-foot tall cellular communications antenna to be located at the southeast portion of the property at 1300 South 7th Street. And I turn over to the city.
We'll have the applicant speak first.
Okay. So state your name and address, please.
Good evening, Madam Chairman. My name is Richard Riley on behalf of Central States Tower. Let me first apologize for my tardiness. It was simply a traffic accident on 94 that slowed us all down. In planning for tonight, in light of the 12-page draft, if you will, of the report from the staff, I put together a very small slide presentation, and then I'd like to go through the staff report if I could. So if we can bring up my slides, see if I remember how to do this. We are here, of course, for a special use permit. You know, this is a continued hearing from last month. I do have with me tonight Verizon representative who's the RF engineer, and will address some specific issues in a minute. I just thought I would, go through what has, up until today, been the major stumbling blocks, and that is compliance with your co-location policy. The so-called Section 708-4 requires an applicant to send notice out to the other wireless carriers to see if they have any space available on their particular facilities. This we have done. It's our duty to analyze the feasibility of co-location. It's based upon the city's list of their wireless carriers, and we send letters out and responses. We did not receive any responses. Nonetheless, we have been asked, and we have done or performed 2 analyses, if you want. One on the AT&T tower, and the other one on a building that's known as the Taylor Street building. And we have submitted detailed responses to both of those situations. We know the AT&T tower is a long story. We have submitted, like I say, 2 formal responses. One, the existing AT&T tower, excessively expensive. That has been verified by the city's own independent consultant. And then the Taylor Street building, simply put, it's just too far from the search ring, too far away from where our site needs to be located. And Tricia later on tonight will so testify to that. So I spent the next couple of slides mainly on the Taylor Street building. I think you've all seen the AT&T tower analysis. So this is the face page of the second formal response that we've put together. And these are some of the provisions. I didn't go into it in detail. I don't mean to take a lot of time tonight. But we were initially asked on August 17th by Mr. Olson to deal with this Taylor Street building. And we responded then, that it is simply was never considered because it's too close to an existing Verizon cell site and it's outside of the search ring. So our searchers, of course, would be directed not to go outside the search ring. The second time, back in September 2nd, again, we had another request to speak more directly about this site. And again, we responded, I'm trying to read this and I'm too far away from that screen, so pardon me. It's 7 miles, we're 0.7 miles away from our current site, and we're half a mile away from the search ring. And we provided maps, to demonstrate that. The first map was put together by Tricia, and it shows our search ring. In this case, it was, I'm sorry, it won't show up on your screen. A square, and you can see the distance. And then I put together this particular one showing the distance from the search ring. And you'll hear testimony later on tonight that it's simply not, it would not work. It's not feasible from a radio frequency standpoint. So, we were asked in this last formal response for a direct statement. And the direct statement is no, necessary service cannot be provided by co-location on the 507 East Taylor Street building. It's too far removed from where the proposed wireless facility has to be located. This is, if nothing else, it's an intense engineering exercise to locate these sites. And of course, it would be easy if we could locate the site anywhere. It is a grid system. And where you can have half a dozen sites in areas that bring no concern at all, when you grow the system, you have to locate a site in between other sites, and it can lead to some very sensitive locational issues. This is the official new RF information that was provided, in which Tricia can address a little bit later on. The area that's under consideration is in need of service. Once again, this need was established or confirmed by your own consultant, Pyramid Consultants. The primary objectives: improve coverage along Highway 23 and I-88, improve reliable in-building coverage, provide capacity relief in the area to improve data speed. This site is a blend. The capacity could be more of an issue for us than actual coverage, but it needs to be, enhanced. Here's a list of existing Verizon wireless sites. You'll see a map of those following. It give you an idea of the density of the sites and why this site has to be located, where it is. You can see, I know this is in your packet, but if you read it, you can see the existing sites, and you can see here, the little box down the bottom, that's where the proposed new site's going to go. The coverage difference, when you turn that on, is immediate. It makes a huge difference in the provision of wireless service. I will add that it's going to make a big difference not only for Verizon, but there's going to be other wireless carriers that are going to need to provide service in this area and are going to need a structure on which to do it. I'm not saying that their search rings are identical to Verizon. A lot of times they differ, but they will gravitate toward an existing tower if it's available. Pyramid Consulting was hired by the city of DeKalb to come in and to review our documentation. And essentially, they talk about the coverage maps. What they really confirm here is the need for service in this area, and the fact that any site in this area, either on the AT&T tower or on a tower we're proposing, would do much to alleviate, that concern. And then we have the staff report, and the staff report is extensive, and I actually think it's a good summary of all the issues that have come before you. And I'd like to go through that with you. I have made copies. I've taken the liberty of making copies of it and highlighting the exact areas that I wanted to talk about. And I'd like to distribute that if I may, Dan. I know you're going to address
They
the
do have
staff report
copies
as
of it,
well.
but you can distribute those, yeah. Thank you.
The beauty of this document, you may, is it is generated by your own staff.
Thank you.
I mean, we all know the general issues, right? We need a special use permit. The tower's 140 feet high. It's in a light one, L1 industrial district where your own ordinance contemplates that these structures will be permitted. The next page I'd like to draw your attention to is on page 3, in a notation that we have previously applied for a special use permit. This process actually started all the way back in 2014. I withdrew that petition because at that time, the AT&T tower was being discussed, and we were asked to eliminate the possibility of locating on the AT&T tower. Verizon Wireless took that path, and they showed good faith. They actually came before you and asked for a special use permit to go on the AT&T tower, went before City Council. That petition was approved, all before they finished negotiating with AT&T, only to find out the cost associated with AT&T was prohibitive. And it derailed that. But the reason I bring it up is I wouldn't want you to think that Verizon Wireless is not trying to follow the directions from the city. That's simply not true. And of course, then we refiled when we found out that the AT&T tower was not, I'm on page 4 already, when we found out that the AT&T tower was not possible. And it was, you know, the amount of money was way too high. We did provide a affidavit, you know, that, you know, from our AT&T engineer. Verizon said you can make some changes and we'll reduce the amount of money. But the changes they suggested, one is prohibited by your own ordinance, that is to run wires overhead. And the second one, we're talking a couple $1,000s. We submitted an affidavit from a Verizon, you know, engineer, so stating that fact was confirmed once again by your own consultant, Pyramid Consulting. Let's see. On page 5, you know, Pyramid is discussing, and once again, there you're talking about your own consultant. They are discussing the need for service in that particular area. You know, and we have provided updated coverage maps, you know, and we will discuss these in a little bit more later on. The next page, on page 6, you know, the next concern was points of visual interest should be protected. But your ordinance only requires us to take extraordinary steps if we're within 250 feet of any residential properties. We are 730 feet away. The closest public space, a park, is about 900 feet from the Verizon tower, which would make it about 1,100, 1,200 feet away from where we're proposing our tower. So the bottom line is that even by the terms of your own ordinance, we do not have a visual impact. And then they go into methods of protecting points of, you know, visual interest. You know, once again, it's notated there's no residential districts within 250 feet. There's discussion that other towers in town are located 300 feet away from residential properties. The AT&T tower itself is located only 300 feet away from residential properties. The color, of course, will be a neutral gray. You know, actually the towers come galvanized, and in about 6 months they weather from shiny galvanized to a dull light gray. Never requires painting. You don't have to worry about paint chipping or coming off of the structure. It is considered by most jurisdictions to be a preferable, you know, color to leave the tower. And the height, you know, they discussed the height. You have a provision in your zoning ordinance that allows us to increase the height of a tower when we are applying for a special use if we have sufficient setbacks. In this case, we do have sufficient setbacks to allow that additional height. And the additional height is important for another reason. Your ordinance favors co-location, and you want any structure that's built in town to service other providers so you can reduce the number of towers in town. That's why the co-location policies and your own co-location protocol is so strong, because you want to favor that. And then there's a discussion about setbacks adjacent to residential uses. You know, again, there's a statement that we're 710 feet away from the nearest residential property. You know, lighting, there's going to be no lighting on this particular tower. I was not aware, but you had reached out to the DeKalb airport manager, but he confirmed that it's not going to have any impact on the airport. We had already applied for clearance from the FAA, which is standard in the business to get that kind of an approval. Fencing, we comply with your fencing, landscaping, and screening. You know, there is a note that additional plantings will be required for a portion of the west side of the fenced area. That's fine. Petitioner understands the need to provide that kind of landscaping and has no objection to it. Tower design, yes, a monopole is what is suggested by your ordinance, and that is, of course, what we are, you know, providing as part of our drawings. You can see, but it's a monopole. And then we talk about the co-location protocol, which has been the big stumbling block up until now. You know, and they talk about, you know, completing co-location protocol. We've made 2 formal responses, as I've said before. It says later on down on the page, look at page 8, down the bottom, the city has the ability to force, you know, or compel co-location if an unwilling does not have the ability to force or compel co-location. The city applicant have reached out to AT&T and attempted to negotiate the co-location of facilities, but AT&T has persisted in bringing forward a cost that is several times multiple of the cost of new tower construction. There's a very thorough analysis done by Pyramid Consulting, once again, regarding the cost. While this has been a challenging, multi-year process, the applicant appears to have complied with the intent of the co-location protocol in regards to the AT&T tower and has exhausted reasonable co-location possibilities to provide service in the intended area. Then they go on to talk about the Taylor Street building, the 16-story building. You know, it has other wireless providers on it. If it was in the center of the search ring or close to it, we would be glad to use it, but it's not, and it won't work from a radio frequency engineering standpoint. People ask why you haven't considered it. If it's outside of the search ring, it would not be considered. You know, the difficulty in this whole process of establishing the wireless network is to find sites that are going to work together as a grid and provide the coverage necessary. And then we get into the standards of a special use. And this is important because essentially if we meet the standards, then we are entitled to be granted the special use. And if we don't meet the standards, then, you know, we're not entitled to a special use. So I'd like to spend a couple of minutes going over these standards. The first one, it complies with all the provisions of the applicable district regulations. You know, we are, you know, light industrial district, you know, and except for the additional landscaping needed that has been noted that we agreed to, you know, we comply with all the requirements of the light industrial district. So the special use will not be unreasonably detrimental to the value of upper property in the neighborhood. The closest residential structure is approximately 730 feet away from the proposed Verizon tower. There is an existing 300-foot AT&T tower to the south of the subject site and is approximately 300 feet away from the nearest residential structure along 7th Street. For comparison purposes, a recently installed 190-foot tall cell tower behind the DeKalb Police Station along West Lincoln Highway is approximately 300 feet away from the nearest residential structure. The proposed cell tower will be situated behind the building on the subject site and further away from residential area than the adjacent 300-foot tall AT&T communication tower. Records from DeKalb County, you know, indicate the assessments, this is the next paragraph down, of residential properties in the area along 7th Street have gone up the past years despite the presence of the existing AT&T tower. Number 3, it says the location, size of the special use, the nature and intensity of the operation involved in conjunction with, or the location of the site with respect to streets giving access to it are such that the special use will not dominate the immediate neighborhood or to prevent development and use of neighboring property in accordance with the applicable zoning regulations. The response, the surrounding area is already developed with commercial, industrial, institutional, and single-family residential uses. A 300-foot communication tower has existed on the property to the south for several decades. The special use will not dominate the immediate area and will not prevent development on the neighboring properties. Number 4, adequate utility, drainage, and other such necessary facilities have been or will be provided. And the response is that adequate public services are already provided to the subject site. Power and that will be brought in, underground. We will do whatever your ordinance requires. And your ordinance does require power to be brought in underground, by the way. The next standard is long to read, but it has, I will, for the purpose of the record, the proposed use where such developments and uses are deemed consistent with good planning practices or can be operated in a manner that is not detrimental to the permitted developments and uses in the district. I would remind everyone that this is a light industrial district and it's your heaviest classification, or one of them, where uses are allowed. They can be developed and operated in a manner that is virtually, or visually, I should say, compatible with the permitted uses in the surrounding area. Shall in all other respects conform to the applicable regulations of the district in which it is located and is deemed essential or desirable to preserve and promote the public health, safety, and general welfare. Communication systems, of course, are at the very heart of all of our safety systems in the city today. Your police and fire. The police department will tell you that, I forget what the percentage is here, but I'm sure it's well into the 80s of emergency calls come in on cellular phones today. So it is, and I would add that recently, state of Illinois, AT&T has petitioned the Commerce Commission, and it has been granted leave to abandon their wireline network. Simply stated, if you have a wireline phone and it's working, that's good. If it stops working, they're not going to fix it. And they're doing that because of the tremendous cost that's involved in maintaining that wireline system when the customer base is not longer there. When's the last time that someone goes into an apartment and looks around for telephone jacks and where they're going to plug in a telephone? I'm not even sure they're wiring new construction for telephone jacks anymore. That'd be a good question. Next page, page 11, conclusions and recommendations. It's true that we are not the telecommunications provider, but I'm not sure that is relevant, as Verizon does not build their own towers anymore, nor do any of the major, wireless companies. They consider themselves not to be in the real estate business. They are in the wireless communications business. But nonetheless, it is Verizon who directs, people to find sites for them. There are limited opportunities for co-locating an antenna on an existing structure in the southeast side of DeKalb, near the industrial parks where the majority of the unserved area is located. The next paragraph on page 11, the desired outcome for everyone in 2015, when the special use permit was approved for the co-location on the AT&T tower, has been held up by the unusually high cost to do the co-location. That's been confirmed by Pyramid Construction. I do have their handout as well. We can go over that if you so desire. There's, discussion that a sample motion to approve has been prepared, that if you desire to deny the application, that new findings of fact are going to have to be entered into. Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, all the evidence, that we have presented, concurred by your own consultant, shows that we have met the standards. And I ask you to approve the special use permit. There are conditions that are suggested. I would like to I'll go over them briefly. We don't have any problems, with number 1 or number 2, submitting the plans, the applications, building permit. Of course, we would do that as a matter of course. All the structural engineering, soil borings, all that stuff is done, to allow a full building permit application to be made. Number 3 says the proposed structure is to be painted a neutral color, preferably gray or sky blue. I would ask that you allow the tower to be galvanized if you see fit to approve it, as painting has proven to be simply a headache going forward. And the galvanized color, like I say, weathers to a light gray, which is preferable. That's the color they're suggesting anyhow, a neutral color. Landscaping to the west side, that's not an issue. We will be glad to do that. Number 5 gave me a little bit of concern, only because, it says, provide a structural engineer's report prior to the issuance of building electrical permits for the antennas. The applicant will present information about the dimensions of the panels to be affixed to the top of the tower, which will be evaluated based on their visual impact on the area. With all due respect, those antennas are an integral part of the radio frequency engineering. I know RF engineers probably are not concerned about the visual effects of the antennas, but, I don't think that is going to be a major problem. But I would, certainly if they have a choice, an equal choice, they would choose the least visually obtrusive. And we will make that representation that we will do that. But, it's really a very strong engineering issue, what type of antennas to use. That, by the way, is why flagpoles are not being used anymore, because the new antennas don't fit the area available in a flagpole. Number 6, yes, of course, the co-location. That's one of the benefits of having a third party own the tower. Their business is real estate. Their business is co-locating other carriers on the tower. It's a very self-interest to do that, of course. So if I may, I'd like to introduce Tricia to you. Tricia, if you could come up for a minute. And if I can, I might go back on these slides. And if you would state your name and record, for the record.
Sure. I'm Tricia Boyan, and I'm from Verizon Wireless, located at 1515 Woodfield Road in Schaumburg, Illinois.
And can you tell the board, Tricia, in your own words, what you do with Verizon, what your responsibilities are?
I'm responsible for the state of Illinois, part of state of Illinois, especially DeKalb, to design and design if there's a need for any cellular tower. And I'm responsible for the coverage and the capacity around the area.
Thank you. And you have put these documents together, I believe?
Yes, I did.
And if you can see the picture on the board.
Yes.
The existing cell sites, are around, and they in turn determine the location of any future cell site.
Correct.
We have just started construction on a proposed new site.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's in the bottom of the screen.
Right.
And yet, that's not going to affect the location of this site where it has to be located.
No, it doesn't. As you can see from the map, that
As we-
we need coverage around 88 and 23 and capacity.
And this site, when we go to the next slide, clearly shows that capacity around not only the proposed site, but also the new site that is going to be constructed.
Correct.
The two buildings, if I can go back all the way, this is thank you very much. Thank you. This is a document that you prepared, is it not?
From Google Earth.
From Google Earth, yes? Okay. And it shows that the Taylor Street building is 0.7 of a mile away from the proposed location of the, new tower, the 140-foot Central States Tower. So just for the record, Tricia, can you state that the Taylor Street building would not work from a radio frequency engineering standpoint because it would not integrate into the existing system? Is that a correct statement?
That's correct.
Okay. And then I put together, just for purposes, another exhibit, and I drew the search ring, which has been previously submitted to the city, and it's the same, it's never been changed. And you can see that the Taylor Street building is 0.5 mile away from the search ring. which means that the searchers would never have even considered it in the beginning. I don't know if anyone has any questions for Tricia, she would be glad to answer them.
Madam Chair, if I could inquire a little bit.
Please.
I guess at the outset, would you agree that if there was an existing location or existing tower, that it would be ordinarily preferable to locate on an existing tower, all other factors being equal, instead of building a new tower?
That's correct.
Okay. What is as an RF engineer, what is the effective range of a cellular antenna?
It varies. It varies where the antenna is located, depends on the terrain, and also the height, what height the antenna is being placed.
So a taller height would increase the effective range of an antenna?
Yes, yes.
And in terrain that's relatively flat, as we have here in DeKalb, does that enhance or reduce the range of an antenna?
It enhances.
You had indicated before that the tower at the building at 507 East Taylor, which is roughly 2/3 of a mile from this site, wouldn't work from an engineering perspective. Do you know how tall that tower is, that building?
I think that building is 5 to 7 stories.
So if I
But
suggested...
that's not why we did not pick the building. The building is very close to one of our cell sites, so it will be like duplicating our own coverage. And we want to go farther southeast where there is no tower or our antennas, and that's where we do extensive study on where we need a cell site, depending on not just coverage, as we have a very mature system and our customer base is increasing. So we need to figure out where we need a cell tower. That means where people need coverage, and not just coverage, just also capacity, so that they can upload, download, especially data now. So if you're farther away from a cell site, that means it will take you longer to communicate. That means upload or download data. Or the speed will lag if you're away from a cell site. So that's why we figured out we need something where we are proposing right now, because there is a potential need for more customer base.
And the speed or the bandwidth or the capacity of a tower, that would also be influenced by the terrain and by the height of the antenna, is that correct?
Of course, and also if there's, and more tall towers or tall buildings, or is there any obstruction, depending on that. But here, there is no other tall buildings, so that.
So if I suggested the height of the 507 East Taylor building was taller than 5 to 7 towers, would that enhance its capacity to serve this area or reduce its capacity?
No, it will not, because it is getting extremely close to one of our cell sites, so it will interfere and not do the benefit that we're looking for.
So just a moment ago, you had indicated that factors such as the elevation of surrounding properties and geography and the height of the location of an antenna, the height of the antenna, are significant factors that impact upon the antenna's ability to deliver service.
It does, but if there is only one cellular tower in DeKalb, then of course the height and the location will matter. But we have several towers around DeKalb area, so if there was no tower at all in the town of DeKalb, then one cell site with 1,000 feet will cover the whole area. But one cell site cannot handle unlimited number of calls or data or any other services. That's why when we have more capacity needs, the cell towers need to go lower, and we need more of them.
If I may make a point of clarification, not to interrupt, but the tower that we are seeking approval for is 140 feet. We are not mounting at the 140-foot level. We're mounting at the 125-foot level, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So elevation, yes, increases the distance, but not to the point where you're going to interfere with other cell sites. So it's an integration of a grid that is important. So you can isolate a single factor like elevation, but in this case, that's not an issue, because we wouldn't go any higher. We don't even go to 140 feet because it would interfere, so.
So continuing with some of the questions about this, if you are unable to locate in the preferred location on your grid, are there things that you can do to adjust an undesirable or less desirable location to make it functional by changing the height of the tower, changing the type or nature of equipment that you're installing? Are there other things that you can do to influence when you're not able to attain a ideal location?
Then we have to compromise on the kind of service we're providing to our customers. This is where we need to be. If we cannot go there, we have to maybe make adjustment to neighboring cell site, but that will not be our desired design.
But if this site, for example, if the residential neighborhood extended some distance to the east and this site were not available for development, then your next step would be to look at alternate sites or to look at adjustments to existing sites to try and improve service in this area?
Right.
Okay. There's an existing cellular tower antenna located near Interstate 88. Are you familiar with that tower?
Okay.
It's showing on her maps.
Yeah, let me see. No.
Let's see if I get to it. Wait, sorry, I went back too far. If I get the buttons right. It was in the documentation she had provided, right? It's shown on this exhibit. You can see it in the lower left corner.
Are you familiar with that tower as well?
Yes.
And do you know the distance of that tower from this location?
I don't have that exactly with me, but it looks like maybe more than a mile.
Were you responsible for the site selection here?
Yes.
Did you
yes.
investigate that tower?
Yes.
But you're not aware of the distance between that tower and this location?
I am aware, but I don't know right now.
Okay.
I have it.
Do you know if there are any vertical obstructions between the location of that tower and the area of need based on your cell service assessment here?
No, there is nothing between these two towers.
And that's also, again, given DeKalb's geography, that's relatively flat grade, and there's not much in the way of vertical undulation that would isolate that tower?
I'm not.
I don't
I don't
understand the
follow what
question, yes.
you're
It's
asking.
relatively flat terrain between that tower and the location that you're proposing this tower for.
Right.
And is that tower also significantly geographically isolated from your existing towers, more shown further north on the map there?
Yes, it is further south and west, and it covers the west side of the 88.
And so that tower would not suffer from significant interference or adverse influence from the other existing towers?
That is correct.
If you look at the next exhibit that I just brought up.
Mr. Riley, I really appreciate your statements here, but I would like to ask a couple questions of the
Go right ahead. I
witnesses.
just want to make sure that we're clear going forward.
I appreciate that. In the course of conducting your search, there's a relatively small search ring that was described in some of the documentation. Can you describe what the radius of that search ring is?
It's about a quarter of a mile.
And the distance of a quarter of a mile, locating anywhere within that quarter of a mile radius would be an adequate location to meet your needs?
Yes. Yes.
So from one side of the ring to the far extreme side of the ring, it'd be about a half a mile distance if it's a quarter mile radius?
Approximately.
So you can accept different locations that are a half a mile away from each other, but yet the location at Taylor Street, which is just over 6/10 of a mile away, is
No.
not an acceptable
No,
location?
that's more than 0.7 miles away, further north.
So, I'm sorry, so
No.
you can accept a half mile variation
Right.
near this site, but you can't accept 7/10 of a mile variation?
No, not right now.
Okay. In the documentation that was provided by Verizon, there was also documentation provided regarding the cost of constructing a new tower at this location. There was a number of attachments given providing different breakouts for construction cost, and I believe those were provided to show a comparison of the cost of a new tower versus the cost of co-locating on the AT&T tower. Are you familiar with those documents?
No.
Do you have any familiarity with the construction cost of documents or the construction cost of cellular towers?
No, I'm not responsible for construction costs.
Who at your company would ordinarily be responsible for that? Or do you know who at your company prepared the Verizon documents that were submitted with the construction cost estimates on them?
I can find them out, but I don't have the names right now.
So when we started, I had asked you if all other factors were equal, would you prefer to co-locate or build a new tower? If the cost of co-location was relatively equal to the cost of building a new tower, is it still your indication that you'd prefer to locate on an existing tower to co-locate?
Yes.
So if the city evaluated the cost estimates that were submitted and ascertained that they excluded certain costs, such as the cost of a foundation for the tower or the cost of the actual monopole tower itself, and if the results of that examination suggested that the cost of co-location was significantly closer in price to the cost of building a new tower, would that diminish the significance of the cost of co-location in this case? Would that suggest that co-location could be a better option?
With all due respect, Tricia is not involved in the construction or the building of the system. This is not her area of expertise. So as long as you have questions regarding the RF engineering and the need, that's fine. But if it goes into construction costs, then that's another discussion I'd be glad to have.
Okay.
Yeah.
These were submitted by Verizon as a component of their request to the city and as a component that they're asking the city to evaluate to compare the cost of constructing a new facility to the co-location costs as a part of the explanation that co-location is unduly burdensome. So the witness has identified herself as being responsible for RF engineering and tower location in some significant portion of the state of Illinois.
Correct.
We're trying to have a detailed understanding of how that process would work. And at the outset, she had explained the preference towards co-location and towards not installing additional towers. So if these are questions that would be better directed to you, perhaps?
Perhaps. Let me ask
Okay.
one final question, Tricia, as long as she's here. Tricia, it's clear that the AT&T tower would work from an RF standpoint. Yeah, and we've always had that position. That's why we applied for the special use in the beginning. All right.
One last question then. So you don't have any familiarity with exploration of the physical conditions on the ground at the location of this proposed new tower? You
No.
don't know if any soil borings have been done or geological studies or anything? You have no knowledge of that. Is that fair?
No,
Okay.
that's not my responsibility.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I would like to, we may continue that conversation.
So I guess then, based on the documents that were submitted in the conversation we just had, if I could ask you a couple questions about the submittal?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's fine.
All right, you had questions regarding construction.
Yes, so in the documentation that was submitted, there were two Verizon pricing estimates for a site, State Highway 23 in Fairview, contemplating a cost between $169,385 and roughly $173,865.
Correct.
In the city's review of those, they include a number of different things such as antenna and coax install, attachments for the tower, but they appear to exclude the tower itself, the actual monopole tower, the tower erection or crane service to install and erect the tower, and the foundation for the tower. Do you have any indication why those would not appear in the cost estimates?
No, I don't know how they've worded that. These are cost construction estimates that were submitted because, at the original, 140-foot tower. Central States Tower, seeks bids for construction.
So on the quote, for example, it says tower erection crane and has a line next to it and has a blank in that line. There's a dash. Or it says tower foundation, has a line next to it and it has a dash with no price.
I
And it
can't
has-
speak to the individual documents, what was included. The reason that they were given to the city is because they were developed specifically for this site. And then the city went out and hired their own consultant, Pyramid Consulting, and that's the report I've given you. And if you take a look at the second or third page, they go through their own analysis of what it would cost to co-locate, and they are within a couple $1,000s of the two estimates that we submitted. So, it's not me taking the position that these numbers are necessarily accurate. Your own consultant takes the position that the total anticipated cost is $169,000 or $268,000 more to do the build-out on the AT&T tower.
Yeah, I certainly understand that, I guess.
Okay,
the
I mean, are you
question- the
disputing
question that
your own
we're-
consultant? I'm having a
No, I'm
hard.
sorry. The question we're trying to understand is, it seems as though what you have indicated, or what Verizon is attempting to indicate, is that the cost of co-location is unduly burdensome here. And what we're trying to understand is the cost of co-location as compared to the cost of installing a new tower. If the cost of installing a new tower is significantly less than the cost of co-location.
Well, we use co-location, we are talking about a specific tower, and that's the AT&T 300-foot tower. And the structural report that came in on that, indicated, they have stayed with their figures of $400 and some odd $1,000. In fact, that's in your consultant's report. So $439,000, $897 to be precise, is what AT&T is suggesting or demanding has to be paid in order to co-locate in that tower. And your consultant was asked about the normal build-out cost for a typical site. We submitted 2 bids, and I'm not that familiar with the bids, but the bottom line on those bids, one was $169, you said, and one was $173. Your own consultant came up with $169,000, and he calls out everything in that bid. So does that not lead us to believe that the relative cost for building a new tower, as we have stated it to be, is accurate?
I guess the question, and it's helpful to understand that maybe there's some confusion in the documents that have been submitted by Verizon. The question is, our consultant's report indicates that the cost of co-locating on a proposed new Central States tower,
Right.
the submitted overall cost, according to our consultant, is $171,625. And that
Okay.
is the cost of co-locating on your tower. That does not include the cost of the tower itself.
You're confusing me. I'm not following what you are saying. Your
What-
consultant verified that the AT&T cost was the $400,000 figure, and he says a normal build-out to build the tower is $169,000. We submitted 2 bids that are within a couple $1,000s of that. So, and he says the differential here is a $268,272 cost difference between the AT&T site and the Central States Tower site.
Right. It would seem that the cost so the AT&T site is existing, it is in the ground. It would seem that the cost that's missing from Verizon's cost estimates for co-location would include the cost of actually
it's-
putting up the new monopole tower.
It may be, but it's not missing from your own consultant's report.
Our
I mean, who are we
consultant's
to, I
report-
mean, really, it's your consultant, and that's what he is saying. So, I mean, we're within virtually the same dollar amount has been submitted by Verizon, 2 different bids from 2 different companies, and now you have your own consultant telling you that the cost is $169,000, and he calls out foundation, he calls out everything, so I'm having
So
a hard
I-
time understanding, council, where you're going with this.
I would be happy to address what the city believes our consultant's report indicates, but just a couple more questions for you. Has any actual investigation at this site been conducted yet? Any geographic borings, any determination of soil conditions?
I don't believe so. That usually takes place after, the permitted is given, the special uses are granted, and we go through the zoning process. And the reason we do soil borings all the time is because they go directly to the structural company who designs the foundation to meet those soil conditions. Is there a concern that Verizon would not do that, or that Central States Tower would not do that? Certainly, it can be a condition of approval, but, but this is normal submittal information with a building permit application. It goes for a full review, which one of them is the foundation design, which is backed up by the soil borings. But
Right.
We
No,
don't do that up front.
Certainly understand that. I think, again, Verizon's point has been that the cost of co-location is too great. And so we're
Yes.
trying to understand
Yes.
the extent to which that cost has been fully investigated. So understanding that, for example, soil borings haven't been performed, we don't know the conditions at the site, could mean that when you go to actually erect a new tower, you encounter unanticipated costs that are not built into any of the cost estimates.
Well,
But
those
I'll
are-
reserve the rest of my comments for the commission then. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Okay, so now I turn over to the city for comments.
Yes,
As normal.
you have the staff report, which was handed out, was in your packet, of course, and a lot has been discussed. You all know the proposal, so I'll try and summarize as much as I can here. Initial hearing was held on August 23rd regarding the request. It was continued to September 20th, so additional documentation can be submitted by the applicant. The minutes from the August 23rd meeting are in your packet, so you have reference to that for some background. Prior to the scheduled 20th meeting on September, there was some documentation was still coming in. There was not adequate time to prepare a full staff report, so we asked for a continuance of the meeting to October 4th. A few days before that, we had requests from the applicant or indication that the Verizon rep could not attend the meeting, so the commission continued the meeting to this evening. Since that October 4th meeting, the applicants provided some additional documentation, including information regarding the Taylor Street Plaza, which has been presented tonight by the applicant. Background, I won't go into that much. Again, a couple years ago, there was a same request submitted. It was continued a few times for lack of information being provided and to push for the co-location of the 18 tower. Eventually, it was denied by the commission, the request based on the application was incomplete. The applicant did not honestly convey our ability or opportunity to co-locate an adjacent 18 tower and opposition from neighboring resident. That's from the minutes of that meeting in April 2015. After that, the petition was withdrawn. They pursued the co-location 18 tower that was recommended for approval by the commission, approved by the council. A permit was applied for and a permit was issued for the work, and the work was not done. The applicant indicated, has been noted several times, they approached the city in May, and their cost estimate to co-locate on the 18 tower was almost $440,000. An estimate was provided in your packet in the past, and this one also explaining that. The costs are related to, according to the estimate, site preparation, tower remediation, electrical upgrades, project oversight by AT&T. That estimate was prepared by AT&T for Verizon, and a rep from AT&T did respond confirming that amount. The response was submitted by Thomas Wilson, project manager for 18 Towers. The email has been in the past packets and tonight's packet also. Via an email on July 20th of this year. The email also included a markup of the plans showing some changes on that. One of those would be from underground utilities to overhead, and also some changes with the concrete slab. They indicated that the change would have a significant reduction in the cost. As noted, Verizon came back at the hearing noting that that change from the RF engineer would not be substantial, would still be over $400,000. Looking at the cost analysis for the co-location on the AT&T tower, again, the estimate was provided, almost $440,000. Email further stated that Verizon's costs are amplified by co-location in the adjacent 18 tower because Verizon would have to pay that cost and capital costs for tower modifications, and usually a higher monthly rental rate than normal. The applicant did submit the affidavit at the public hearing on the 23rd, indicating the changes would not significantly reduce that cost. Since the August 23rd meeting, the applicant has submitted 2 estimates to construct the proposed Verizon tower. There's discussion on the testimony regarding the cost of that and what it included and did not include. But that was on average about $171,000. We did request additional feedback from AT&T. We tried to contact them at the request of the commission to attend these meetings, and they have not been responsive from several emails and phone calls regarding looking at their estimate and also attending or having a representative attend this meeting. AT&T has not responded to several phone calls recently and emails regarding that. So just wanted to make you aware of that. We did engage a third-party consultant, Pyramid Consulting, review the coverage maps and cost estimate for the co-location on the 18 tower and also the new Verizon tower. They also reviewed the markup plans that AT&T had put together that indicated that the cost would be significantly reduced. You have a copy of that report in your packet, was just handed out by the applicant. Regarding the pyramid indicates that the co-location cost between AT&T and the proposed Verizon tower should be similar. However, there is a difference. It appears to be specialized work on the AT&T tower, example, lead remediation, other work, and site costs and general contractor oversight, if you take a look at the detail. They also reviewed the marked up plan that AT&T had done and that they indicated would be significant reduction. Their report concurs with the assessment by Verizon that the cost would not be significantly reduced and would probably still be over $400,000. So they didn't provide an estimate exact, but they concurred that it would not be a significant reduction. In addition, we don't allow overhead lines, utility lines in the city. Pyramid also reviewed the two estimates provided by the construction of the new Central States Tower and accessory equipment. The average cost between the two estimates was $171,000. We just had some discussion, testimony regarding that list of costs there and estimates. Pyramid indicates in the report that it appears all the issues are covered in the estimate for the build-out of the site for the Verizon tower. Pyramid also notes a typical co-location cost based upon their experience with those similar towers is about $169,000. Again, that's co-locating on an existing tower. Pyramid also reviewed the coverage maps. There is some limited amount they can review that because it's proprietary rights of all the cell carriers. So they cannot review their technical maps or go into detail. They did review the maps that were provided. They indicated that it appears that they're covering an area that lacks coverage based on their maps. But again, they're proprietary, so the amount of the review is somewhat limited on that. Pyramid is an Indianapolis-based consulting firm. They're working actually on the implementation of the county's new digital telecommunications system. So there's some background on that company. The Unified Development Ordinance, we have, of course, regulations in the UDO regarding the placement, design, use of wireless communication equipment. It also stipulates required criteria that must be met, the co-location protocol, which has been discussed a lot. The applicant did provide photo simulations how the tower would look from the existing view and with the tower constructed from all different directions. They also provided and testified regarding the background of the need for coverage in that area. They also provided updated coverage maps for the new tower that recently constructed at I-88 and Annie Glenn Road, and those maps are provided in your packet. So the UDO requires or has a list of special use standards for special use specifically for antenna facilities, and I'll go through those. One of the points of visual interest shall be protected. Those are with views of residential structures located within 250 feet of the tower. Again, this tower will be further back from residential areas, so that item does not apply to this location. However, it'll still be in the view shed. And as noted, the existing 300-foot tower, in terms of natural resource in there, the closest is the McCormick Park to the south, which is closer to the 300-foot AT&T tower. Methods for protecting points of visual interest, if it, again, it's not within 250 feet, so that item would not apply. It was discussed regarding the color. They have a neutral color. The height, there is a max height in the light industrial district. The UDO requires for cell antennas, towers, to be allowed to be 15 feet over the max height under the underlying zoning district. So the light industrial has 75 feet, so 15 feet more. Be 90-foot max height. It's a 140-foot tower. The standards do allow with the special use permit increase in the tower height if there's additional setbacks based on the height, which they do meet. And also if the commission finds through your findings that there's a reasonable or need for a higher tower. And they've indicated that is needed for the additional cell carriers on the tower in the future that would come. Antennas, in terms of setbacks to residential areas, it has to be set back from residential areas the same distance as the height of the tower, which is 140 feet. Nearest residential is 710 feet away, so they do meet that. Lighting, as mentioned, they've received approval a couple years ago from the FAA. Consulted with the airport manager, and he indicates there's no interference with the airport operations with the proposal. Fencing, they required a 6-foot fence around the property. The plans do show that around their tower. Landscaping is required around the areas facing public rights-of-way or residential areas. They do have landscaping shown on the plans along the north and south sides. They need additional plantings are needed along the west side of the fenced area, which the plans do not show, but is one of the conditions if approved. No noise issues here, so they meet that criteria. Tower design, again, it's guy wires are not allowed. This is a monopole. Co-location protocol. Any special use request has to go through the co-location protocol. I provided a copy of the Article 7.8 in your packets, but co-location creates a process for a carrier to come in and have access to from other carriers or contact them and see if there's any possibilities of co-locating on adjacent carriers' equipment. The UDO doesn't state require, although we did require Taylor Street Tower, other properties that are owned not by cell carriers but private owners that have equipment on their building. So we did require that also, though the UDO doesn't specifically state that. But the co-location is preferable where technology feasible and visually desirable as a matter of public policy, but that the co-location of antennas by providers is not always feasible for technical or business reasons. So it's a process that kind of lays out, it doesn't force somebody to co-locate on another property automatically. Per the location protocol, as noted, they submitted letters to the other providers to get a response back from, of course, AT&T, and we went through that with the cost estimate that was provided for that. So the co-location protocol, again, is put in to avoid duplicate towers in area, co-locate, get multiple antennas on one tower instead of multiple towers. That's the intent of it. They reached out to AT&T and unfortunately attempted to negotiate co-location, but that's has not come forward, unfortunately, and we haven't received a good response back from AT&T for the reasoning, or they haven't had a rep come to the meeting, any of the hearings to answer questions. So it's a challenging process. The applicant appears to have complied with the intent of the co-location protocol in regards to the 18 tower. 18 has not responded to emails again or a phone call. So the Taylor Street building is 16 stories, 507 East Taylor Street, about 0.65 miles from the proposed Verizon Tower, owned by the Housing Authority. We did get an email from them indicating that they have a extra pad on top. They got 2 or 3 carriers on the building now, but there might be a possibility on that. The applicant, we have the applicant submit further answers regarding their review of that, and they've testified tonight regarding that, and been much discussion on that item. So they've indicated with that there's too far from the distance of the area, circular area that they want to have their equipment in. They've also provided information regarding it's too close to other locations, and we had testimony and questions regarding that, so you should take that in consideration too with the discussion that just took place. We also have, for any special use permit, standards of findings of fact, and those are listed in your packet here. And I'll go through those. Number 1, the proposed special use complies with all provisions of the applicable district regulations. The proposed tower meets all the regulations. The one exception is the additional landscaping needed on the one side of the fence. Proposed special use will not be unreasonably detrimental to the value of other property in the neighborhood which is located or to the public welfare at large. Closest residential structure is about 730 feet away from the proposed tower. Of course, there's an existing tower next door, 300-foot tall AT&T tower. The police department on West Lincoln Highway has a 190-foot tower behind it that is about 300 feet away from the nearest residential structure. We have several nearby residents speak at the August 23rd hearing regarding comments noting objections to the proposed tower be injurious and to the neighborhood. We didn't receive any documentation. There was several verbal testimony regarding the impact they believe it would have the tower on their property values in the surrounding area. To take a quick look at a few of the residential areas regarding homes, regarding the records from the county, regarding assessment, and they have gone up slightly in the last year or two. So, but again, there was testimony indicating from residents they felt there would be impact on their homes with the new tower. Number 2 takes a look at the location and size of the special use with respect to the neighborhood. If it's going to dominate the immediate area, is it going to inhibit the growth or development of the surrounding area? Much of the surrounding areas are developed with commercial, residential, industrial, institutional uses, of course. There's a 300-foot tower next door that has existed for several decades. Adequate utilities drainage, they've shown in the plans that they'll have adequate power to the site, a 20-foot drive to the site that will serve the tower and the equipment area at the bottom. Number 5 deals a lot with visual compatibility with the permitted uses in the surrounding area. And also talks about promoting the public health, safety, and general welfare of the city of DeKalb. Special use will provide enhanced cell service to the surrounding area, was identified by the applicant as an area that is needed to provide adequate coverage and relief to areas in the southeast portion of the city, including the I-88 corridor. The documents also indicate the new tower will improve in-building and in-vehicle coverage for the area and provide capacity relief for the area to improve data speed. Testimony was provided at the hearing from nearby residents who have Verizon service, indicating they felt their Verizon service was adequate and fine. We also had testimony that people that were in the building on the subject site had poor service. We did request some backup information or customer reports regarding the lack of service in that area. We did not receive any. It's not a UDO requirement, but we did not receive any of that documentation. And as mentioned in the report a couple years ago, we cannot base a decision on perceived impacts of RF emissions or electromagnetic health effects. Citizen input to date, we've had 9 correspondence from surrounding property owners indicating their opposition to the proposal, and 3 correspondents noting their support of the request. And they're made part of your record again. We also provided correspondence in your packet regarding the correspondence from Donna Larkin, who submitted an email dated September 18th indicating requests for the last extension not be granted. Also, there were some documents that were submitted at the August 23rd meeting handed out from resident Dave Lehman. Those are also included in your packet. So all the information from the residents that were submitted in the past have been included here and for your consideration. So in conclusion, recommendation, the challenge here is that the request, or the applicant, Central States Tower, is not the telecommunications provider. In many cases nowadays, that usually the carrier is not building the actual tower. So there's really no incentive for the applicant to co-locate Verizon on another tower or building, but there is limited opportunities for co-location in this part of the DeKalb, the southeast side. I know the desired outcome by everybody in 2015 was a co-location on the 18 tower. They got the approval, they got a permit, and it just did not go forward with the cost of the co-location as provided. And again, AT&T has not responded to requests to clarify that or attend the meetings. So if the commission desires to approve the special use, a sample motion has been prepared. There's some conditions, if you approve it, that we want to include in that motion. And they're listed on the bottom of the page and on the last page. The commission wishes to deny the special use request. It must be per the requirements of the UDO, the special use findings of fact. They were written leaning towards to approve that. If you find testimony, hear anything, or want to deny that, findings would have to be crafted to do that. We can, as a staff, we can certainly help you with that if you wish to do that. If you approve, these are the conditions. The tower and accessory equipment shall comply with the plans that were submitted. Applicant to submit the necessary application and plans to the building department, meeting the code, of course. Be neutral in color, add landscaping on the west side of the fence, provide structural engineer report to make sure it is adequate there. That's a standard requirement. Also with the antenna there, to try and use panels that are equipment that would be, stealth as much as possible in terms of visibility. Upon issuance of the special use permit, the applicant would be required to write and submit in writing that the request by other providers to locate their antenna on the applicant's monopole shall not be unreasonably denied and shall not require lease rent rates beyond the going market rate for such service. Putting that in so if it is built, there's a smooth track to co-locate others on that tower. Completion of the tower and associated equipment shall be completed in a final certificate of certificate of occupancy issued by the city within 1 year. Current regulations, I think, are 2 years that it has to get a permit, so if it is approved, we want to make sure this thing is constructed, is not sitting out there, not built. And if the tower and associated equipment is abandoned or discontinued for a period of more than 6 months, the special use permit is revoked, and any new one would have to come in go through the procedure of special use and hearing. So that's the report. If there's any questions for myself or Dean, we certainly be happy to answer those.
Okay.
And if I can offer just a couple brief
Sure.
comments. So in our review of this, it's very clear that the petitioner's argument with respect to the co-location protocol is that the cost of co-location exceeds the cost of co-location on the Central States Tower. And the point that we were trying to identify, there were a couple points we were trying to identify. One, the rationale for the claim that the Taylor Street building is inadequate for the purposes at issue here. And with the recognition, as Mr. Olson stated, that the tower is roughly twice the height that the petitioner had indicated, that it's 16 stories instead of 5 to 7 stories, and that the geography between the Taylor Street building and this location is very flat. The height of the building is helpful in establishing range and establishing bandwidth, connectivity, and that the petitioner has the ability to make adjustments to their antennas to accommodate for changes in the configuration or orientation of them. That was one of the areas that the city was investigating. The other area with respect to the cost is when we talk about the cost of co-locating on the AT&T tower, that cost is the cost of building on the existing tower. When we talk about the cost of co-locating on the Central States Tower, that tower does not exist. And so the co-location cost for the Central States Tower may be significantly less. It's been identified as somewhere around $170,000. But that doesn't include the cost of actually building that new tower, or the foundation for that tower, or erecting that tower, or providing improvements for that tower. And so if we're doing an apples-to-apples comparison of the total cost of either installation, either the AT&T co-location or the cost of a new tower, the petitioner's information that was submitted is somewhat incomplete in that it doesn't identify those fully loaded costs, so the commission can have a full understanding of whether the co-location protocol was completely satisfied. Understanding that the personnel that are here tonight maybe don't have the greatest understanding of that, or it's not their area of expertise, we just wanted to explore that a little bit to make sure our reading of the documentation was correct. Certainly from the city's perspective, our consultant from Pyramid clearly identified that the cost they were looking at, roughly $170,000, was the cost of co-locating on a tower, a Central States Tower. And there was nothing in their documentation that accounted for the cost of actually constructing that tower. So again, that component is missing in terms of a cost comparison for co-location versus a new install. That was kind of the point of that line of questioning. And again, as Mr. Olson said, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hang on. So before we open up to the public, I give the commissioners the opportunity to ask questions of the city. So if anyone has any questions to the city.
I do.
Okay.
I do too. On the letter from the lawyer, he said attached are the two cost estimates for the subject site at 1300 South 7th Street, but the attachment seem to be for State Highway 23 and Fairview, both of them.
I think that's a geographic thing they've used on the plans, but it's referring to this location. I think they were very broad in their description, but
So it would be like the same,
it's
the
this
same
location.
terrain, the same everything?
Yes, they could probably answer that, but they were just
Yes,
using the wrong.
it's just
probably
a
geographic.
designation that they give initially when they begin the search for a site, you know. It's
So they-
not specific to an address, it is the area which needs attention.
But this seems to be the area that you're locating the other tower, State Highway 23 and Fairview.
It's the way they designated, this was, when we actually started this program, they had not even started that other site that you see at 88, and that
Yeah,
was,
then, but why does it say State Highway 23 and Fairview? And not the
it was a
address?
designation that they gave, and they've stayed with it from beginning to
But
end.
that's difficult then to deal with if we don't have the correct location on the
That does not, that
estimate.
does not refer to a specific location. That's a geographic area.
But then why
or
does it
service-
say State Highway 23 in Fairview? That is a specific location. If I
Well,
look at
it's
it.
a general intersection. It was meant to indicate a general area.
Yeah, but that's pretty far away from the South 7th Street.
It is pretty far away from that, I will agree, but there's never been any confusion about where this site is located. It's
I
an
know
RF
that,
doesn't,
but it doesn't seem to pertain to that site that you're asking for. You're giving us a different estimate for a different site, not for the site on 1300 South
what
7th Street.
I'm sorry, what estimate are we
Here,
giving you that's
the
different?
Attachment E, line item breakdown for pricing. And the other attachment has
What-
the same
I'm-
thing.
What document are we referring to?
I think that's the Verizon document
The
that
Verizon document.
Mr. Freighters was talking about earlier.
No.
Prepared by Tyler Cutts, and one is prepared by Mercury Communications, and it has the wrong site on there.
The estimate is for this tower at 1300 South 7th Street. They just used some
Yeah.
general Fairview and 23 at the beginning of the plans, even 2 years ago, they referred to that. So their estimate is for this location at 1300 South 7th
It
Street.
really was.
Can that
If
be corrected?
that's your question.
Yeah, can that be corrected somehow?
We can make sure and correct it that they put the exact address of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wait, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Okay, this is for the council. And pardon me if I'm going to be redundant here,
Yep.
but as I was listening to all this, and then I think you answered my question, but I'm going to restate it again. So when I'm listening to all this, there are some agreements. There is an agreement that co-location is preferable, correct?
Yes.
There is an agreement that cost appears to be the prime reason for them not wanting to co-locate on the AT&T tower.
That, from the city's perspective, that appears to be what the petitioner is indicating, yes.
Okay. Well, that's what I've heard tonight.
Mhm.
Okay. There's also agreement that the AT&T cost estimate for co-location is approximately $440,000.
Yes.
Correct. What Pyramid has provided is not construction costs for the Verizon tower, but rather the cost that it would, if the tower was built, the Verizon tower was built, what it would cost another company to come in and say, I want to co-locate on your tower, correct?
No.
Both Verizon's cost estimates and the Pyramid cost
I'm asking
estimate.
him.
I understand,
Sir,
but
thank
I
you.
would like to respond. to-
I'm talking to him,
Thank-
sir.
So
Yes.
both Verizon's two cost estimates and the Pyramid estimate reference co-location on the Central States Tower.
Okay.
They do
Well-
not include the cost of erecting the Central States Tower.
And so that was the other unknown for me. We do not have any information about what the engineering and construction cost estimates would be, or projections would be, for that tower to go up, correct?
That's correct.
So we don't know then if the cost differential is a factor, because the engineering and construction could actually run more, quite a bit more, than the $440,000 for co-locating on the AT&T tower.
Well, I would say what we do know is the cost of simply installing their antennas and related equipment is $170,000, give or take a few
Right.
thousand. So what the cost of putting up the whole tower assembly that's going to support those antennas would be, we have no
Plus the
idea.
engineering, plus any environmental testing that has to go on as part of that, correct?
And as indicated, there hasn't been any site-specific soil borings or assessment done to determine if there would be any unique conditions at the site.
So at this point in time, we really don't know if, once they would know all those costs, if that would actually be cost-effective to build their own. That would, it may not, in fact, it may cost them more money than it would to co-locate. Am I correct?
Based on the information submitted, we don't have a basis to know. That's correct.
Okay, okay. But it could be, because we don't have all the information available on construction.
I think that's a question for the Plan Commission.
Okay.
Anyone else, any questions to the city?
Madam Chairman, I would like to respond at this
Actually,
point. It's
these were
very specific.
questions to the city.
I
We will
understand.
have time to ask you questions after we have our public comment.
Well,
So, we now,
It really is a point of clarification going forward, and it deals directly with the last conversation that we had, and it's confusing everybody. But I will state in 10 words that the estimates given by AT&T, those two estimates, and the breakdown of the cost from your consultant deal with the construction cost of a tower, not co-location. Even though they use the word co-location, if you look at their breakdown, a steel platform, steel antenna structure, that's to construct a site.
Okay.
$169,000.
Thank you.
It's not the co-location cost.
we may have further questions, so.
Absolutely. I'm-
Yeah,
I'm now-
Thank you for
I'm
that.
sorry, that would be my question then. So he's implying that Pyramid has mislabeled the figures that they have provided. And can we confirm that at this point in time?
We cannot at this point in time, although neither, as we noted, Verizon's pricing does not include any pricing for the tower foundation, for the tower erection or crane, or for the tower itself. It references the antenna and coax install and tower attachments. The Pyramid estimate, and that's consistent for both Verizon estimates, I should note. The Pyramid estimate talks exclusively about co-locating on a proposed new Central States tower. And there is nothing in the Pyramid estimate that talks about the construction cost. In fact, it says the two cost estimates are the cost to co-locate at the existing AT&T tower and the cost to co-locate at the proposed new Central States tower. So the Pyramid documents are consistent in indicating they relate to co-location and do not include the cost of construction of the actual monopole.
Okay.
Council, I have a question. If you look at the Pyramid document, cost comparison between two co-location sites, but you go down to item number 3 where they break down each one, typical steel platform, typical antenna structure, is that not the tower, or are those antennas on top of the tower?
From what we understand in reviewing the documentation, we're talking about the actual antenna structure that's a part of the co-location, not the monopole structure itself. And I don't profess to be an expert in the cost of monopole towers, but I know that several years back when the city purchased our used monopole tower, we were able to find a previously constructed monopole tower for use at the police station site. The cost of that monopole, which we were able to buy, it had been manufactured and wasn't needed and was sitting on a lot, and we were able to find it essentially used, was significantly in excess of that. But again, the documentation submitted all references co-location.
Anyone else? I'm now going to open up to public comment.
Will I be allowed to address the board at the end?
Yes.
Thank you.
I need to give the public the opportunity to speak.
I understand.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try and do this in a little organized fashion because I'm assuming there could potentially be some questions for the Verizon person. So I've been handed some speaker request forms. I will go in the order that I have received them, that they were presented. If there are questions specifically for the Verizon person, let's do the public comment first, and then do our questions. We can have her come up, get the microphone, and have you ask questions of Verizon. So I will start with Mr. Lucknow. Did you have any public comment, or did you have questions for the Verizon person? Or both? If you have both, we'll take your public comments, and then we will have questions for the Verizon person. I just want to kind of do this a little organized so we aren't having people go back and forth tonight. If possible. It may not be possible. I'm just trying.
I'm William Lucknow, live on Sleepy Hollow Lane, DeKalb, Illinois. I do have a question for the Verizon representative,
Okay.
and that has to do with the distance of 0.7 miles from the, and I'm not sure what we refer to that building as, the
The Taylor
residential
Street.
tower.
Taylor Street Tower.
Taylor Street Tower, thank you. Between that and the proposed location, I've been at several of these meetings, and I do recall a figure of saying that a mile was the applicable distance. And this is actually less than a mile, and so I am wondering what changed between a mile and 7/10. A mile was, within a mile was adequate. Now, 7/10 of a mile is not adequate. And so I'd like clarification on that.
Okay. So, Tricia, if I could have you come up and, where is the other microphone?
I believe it was left on the chair up there.
Okay. We just can't have you stand too close to that microphone because it'll squeak, but you can go ahead and answer his question.
To answer the question, I'm not sure where you got the mile from.
I believe that was in documentation that was submitted in the first application.
Okay. As far as I'm concerned, the Taylor Street building will not work for us. And that's the only thing I can say. And looking at the plots, we don't want to be at the Taylor Street. That's not going to serve us any solution to our problems.
And can you give me technical reasons why?
Technically, yeah, I have other tools to show, but looking at the plots where we need our coverage and capacity need, the Taylor Street is farther north, where we already have cell sites that it will not do us any good. It will just duplicate our coverage and capacity needs where we really don't need right now.
So if an antenna was located at the Taylor Street building, you're saying that would not enhance the coverage at all?
It will not improve the coverage and the capacity needs farther down south, southeast.
Okay. And
Why
where are we
would I
talking about?
want to put a cell site farther north when that is not where my needs are?
Well, I'm saying maybe you want to because there's a location there, and it's only 7/10 of a mile from where you're proposing the site.
No, no.
And it's also, as been documented tonight, 15 to 16 stories. So it's also a very
Correct.
high site.
High side, but it will not cover I-88
Okay.
farther south.
What about the site that's located near I-88?
That is farther west.
Okay, but does
I
that
need
not also
something
cover?
for east.
Okay, and what is its circumference that it covers?
Which one?
The
Which
one that's near I-88 now? The cell tower that was,
You can see the
recently
map.
put in,
I
yeah.
don't have the scale right now.
okay.
I have to do, I have to look at my map and I can give you exactly, but I don't have that information right now.
Okay, well, those were my questions for you.
Thank you.
very much. Also, I'm going to just make one other comment. I also did look at the requirements, and for the petitioner, and I did not see anywhere in that application where it said costs were a consideration in the location of the tower. Perhaps that could be clarified by the city. Maybe,
Could you repeat
Mr.
that?
Olson, maybe you could tell me, where does it state in the application that costs are a consideration in co-location?
In the applicant's application, the
In-
cost are...
In the city's rules, in section 7,
Oh, and the UDO?
Unified Development Ordinance.
If If I could address that one perhaps. I think as we've explored that issue with the Planning and Zoning Commission at previous meetings, the co-location protocol does not expressly identify costs as a factor. I think what the co-location protocol is intended to explore, and I think the Plan Commission has talked about this previously, is the feasibility of co-location. So if co-location is physically possible, but it is just ridiculously prohibitively expensive, it would perhaps be infeasible to require or recommend co-location. So the co-location protocol was amended into the code several years back to require that analysis of whether there are other options that have a lower impact. Zoning factors as a whole tend to evaluate impact on property values, and certainly cost would be one factor that could impact on the feasibility or marketability of the property at issue where this tower is proposed to go. So it isn't directly referenced, to your point, certainly, but that reference, that discussion of it is more of a broader discussion of feasibility and whether the city's regulations would be unduly onerous to require co-location otherwise.
Okay, I do appreciate that response. I would just add, where does the cutoff come when it comes to cost? If it were, instead of about 440,000, what if it were 340,000? Would that be prohibitive? Or, as you said, ridiculously prohibitive? How does one evaluate the cost?
I think that is, from the staff perspective, that's among the factors that the Planning and Zoning Commission would need to evaluate as they look at this. There isn't a hard black and white rule.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just briefly add, I was able to locate, on April 27, 2015, the City Council authorized the purchase of just the monopole tower that was installed at the police station, which is a little bit taller than this one, but the purchase price for that tower, which was located several states away in an existing and used condition, was $86,766 for the tower itself, exclusive of transportation, install, foundation, engineering, everything related.
Thank you. Ms. Liston?
Linda Liston, 1117 Gifford Street, in DeKalb. And I'm not sure if this is a topic that perhaps the engineer could help me with, because I'm not an engineer, obviously. But one of the reasons that the petitioner was saying that this exact spot is so important is for the buildings that are near that area to receive better in-house communication. And as I looked into this a little bit, I found that this is not an uncommon problem among businesses. And sometimes it has to do with the construction of the building, whether it's steel, has steel or concrete or bricks or wood. And so there are entire companies that actually will help a business figure out how to best bring that radio frequency signal into the building, because some of these construction products can actually create what's called a Faraday cage, where it actually diverts the energy from coming in. And so I didn't know if the petitioner had considered, or Mr. Havis had considered, and he's not here, other ways to improve the in-house communication of his building, rather than, just strictly rely on, we need a new tower. I did happen to read a story that I really brought this home to me. There was a pub owner in London, and he found that when his structure was made of wood, and he found out that when his patrons came in, that as the cell phones became more popular, the people weren't talking to each other, that they were just going on social media. And he felt that this was affecting his business. So what he did was he installed wire mesh in the walls of his building, and now people have to talk to one another. So I just wanted to bring this up, and I don't know if this would impact any discussion, and I didn't know if the engineer might be able to clarify some of that for us. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there's anybody here that can answer that.
Paradise Cage. I knew that from.
I think she asked the engineer with Verizon unless they have a response. I don't have any additional information.
Is that something you'd be able to respond to?
The building owner is here, Mr. Hovis. If
Yeah.
it was mentioned, he's not, but
If
So the
you have
commission's-
a response, sure, come on up. The other microphone's up at the, yeah.
I'm Jim Hovis, and I am the owner of the building, or the corporation that owns the building at 1300 South 7th Street.
Pull the microphone up.
And
Thanks.
my office is in that building, and there are other tenants in the building. And I know that on the perimeter, around the perimeter of the building, you can hear the Verizon signal, okay? But when you start moving into the building, it disappears. And I have not looked at if there's any kind of boosters I could put in, but I'm sure that other buildings would have similar issues. If the signal is weak to begin with, any kind of construction will further dampen that signal. I find it sad that on the coverage map that for over 2 years now, the tower could have been constructed, and all of the people southeast of my building would have reception. Right now, there you can see my building is fairly well located compared to other ones that are further away on that site map. So I would just encourage the zoning committee to approve the zoning and let it go on to the next step of consideration. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Lehman?
if the control room would bring up the next PowerPoint presentation.
I'm Dave Lehman from 621 Karen Avenue. And I'd just like to take a moment before my presentation to help Mr. Hovis to get better reception within his building. And I'm surprised that Verizon and Central States Tower, working with that building for 4 years, did not suggest to you a solution for that problem, which is called a repeater system. Is that not correct, Tricia? And your building is, in effect, a Faraday cage, as many of the buildings are, that are constructed as yours is, as so many of them are. You may remember years ago when cell phones first came out and you would walk into a Walmart or any big box store, you had no coverage. It's not that way now, because that problem was solved. Is that not correct?
Give her. You may want to just hang out in the front row.
Yes, we have other option to address in billing issues. That's another department where we can add repeaters, and there's other options too to improve the coverage inside the building. But as far as we're concerned with this new cell site that we're proposing, signals will improve in the surrounding area. So it will of course improve, but if there's any specific issues on a floor or a basement, that can be addressed with different construction options and different areas of, not in my department, but there's another department that dedicated on working on these issues. And sometimes they're costly, sometimes, they're more reasonable. So based on the need of any specific business or building, that we address according to their need.
But in a building such as Mr. Hovis's, which is one story, do you have a basement, Mr. Hovis?
No, and I appreciate your suggestion about the repeater.
Thank you.
You're most
You won't
welcome.
help people to the southeast, and you don't help me.
Well, let me address a little of that. The person just to the south of you in Cole Pallet, I visited him, and he said, I asked him about his coverage in his building. He says, it's okay. He says, once in a while I drop a call. He says, but if it really was a bother to me, I would do like my brother does, who he must have a business himself. He says he's got a repeater in his business, problem solved. So it's a relatively simple fix. And,
Yes.
and again, Mr. Hovis, I'm sorry that the representatives didn't try to help you solve your problem, because I would expect an expert would have known about that, and 4 years ago would have suggested to you a repeater. And I think, Tricia, some of them are donor systems. You put an antenna on your roof, and then one of your engineers will look at the structure inside the building, analyze where you need to improve your coverage.
Yes, yes.
Okay, and one further thing, because in your, I'm not sure if it was in the affidavit, but it was said that there were many complaints of dropped calls now in the area.
In the area, it can be someone on the car, on the street.
Right. Now, in a dropped call situation, I've been talking with friends of mine who've been traveling through Indiana, and they'll call. Now, if the reason for the dropped call is they're driving through an area without a cell coverage, is that indicated as to where the problem lies or what the source of the dropped call is?
Yes, we can pinpoint who the person who dropped. Is it us or someone else?
Okay.
Yes.
And, okay, in the area just east of the railroad tracks where we have Target, warehouses, Panduit, Nestle, 3M, I visited those places, and I asked about the cell coverage within the building. And some of them have poured steel with the concrete. They have inside the building huge steel frames to put pallets of product on. And two of them told me, we don't want good cell coverage in the building. It's a safety issue. None of our workers are allowed to use their cell phones in the warehouse floor. Now, the office people are a little uneasy about it. They would love to have it, but corporate says, mm-mm. So that, would those register as complaints if people called those in?
I'm not sure where you're going with this question. Are you saying there are customers and they're complaining to us?
Well, I'm saying that we were told that there were, this area was notorious for dropped calls and lost signals. And if you're compiling data that's coming from buildings like Mr. Hovis's, which are Faraday cages, then how reliable would that data be?
I don't think we're, maybe not on the same page. I'm not sure where you're getting your data from, but what we do our research, and we have our own team of people working on this. So I cannot talk about what happened inside a 3M or other companies that I'm not aware of. I don't have that specific information.
No, I'm just saying that the building itself would cause a dropped call, which would then occur in your data as saying, oh, we need to do this. And all I'm suggesting is that the companies themselves are saying, no, because of safety factors, we don't want improved coverage within our building. Now, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying, would that
That's fine.
that
It's
situation.
their company decision. We're not going to interfere with their company decisions.
Right, but it would occur as data in your dropped call situation.
Oh, of course, if there is someone who
Okay.
drops, yeah.
Yeah,
that will
thank
show,
you.
yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. I would like to thank you for this opportunity to voice my concerns on the proposal, which has a long history before this body. All right. Which one? To set the framework for my address to you, I will reflect on the Unified Development Ordinance as it relates to new cell tower construction, the apparent motivations of the petitioner, the initial actions of the petitioner, a review of the first petition request and the current petition. The Unified Development Ordinance, or zoning, consolidates all regulations that govern development in DeKalb. The purpose of the ordinance is to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the residents of the city of DeKalb through the regulation of zoning, subdivisions, and land use. The codes regulating the construction of new cell towers are covered in Section 708 Antenna Regulations. The ordinance reflects the position that cell towers are unsightly and are best placed outside residential areas. It encourages co-location whenever possible. The construction of a new tower should only be granted as a final option. The code specifies the co-location protocol. Any special use request for the erection of a new tower shall complete the co-location protocol as outlined in 7.08.09. If there are existing structures of significant height, they are to be explored for what is called co-location. Co-locations, the positioning of new antennas on an existing structure. Verizon currently has co-located antennas on the City of DeKalb Oak Street water tower. The purpose of the co-location ordinance is to minimize the proliferation of wireless towers by utilizing existing structures to support new antennas. In the case of this petition, Verizon desires to locate new antennas within 1 mile of 1300 South 7th Street. The co-location options would include the adjacent AT&T tower, the Taylor Street high-rise, and the Blackwater Tower on the east end of Taylor Street. Successful co-location eliminates the consideration of a new tower. It is the applicant's duty, as we know, to conduct the co-location feasibility study. The result would be a statement from a qualified engineer indicating whether the necessary service can or cannot be provided by co-location at the possible location site, and evidence that the lessor of the possible co-location site either agrees or disagrees to co-location on their property. If an existing structure in the identified area is suitable for the co-location of new antennas and the owner of the structure is amenable to co-location, no new tower will be built. When a company wishes to erect a new cell tower within the City of DeKalb, they must file a request for a special use permit. Article 1403 of the United Development Ordinance covers special use permits. Item number 1F.
Mr. Lehman, sorry. There.
Oh. Thank you. Item 1F, proposed use and description, states a number of items the petitioner must submit. Among these are how the proposed use would be in conformance with the city's comprehensive plan, as well as its conformance to all elements of the United Development Ordinance. This includes conducting the co-location protocol designated in 7.08.09. Item number 4 states, the petitioner hereby agrees that this petition will be placed on the Planning and Zoning Commission's agenda only if it is completed in full and submitted in advance of established deadlines. Let's take a look at what perhaps has motivated the petitioner, Central States Tower, to again seek a special use permit. Companies are in business to make money. An overview. Verizon is in the highly competitive wireless telecommunications industry. Part of their business strategy is to, as cheaply as possible, place more antennas in their network to offer better service than their competitors, drawing more customers and more profit. Central States Tower builds new towers as well as acquires and manages a portfolio of existing antenna structures. To build a new tower, Central States Tower needs one wireless carrier, Verizon in this case, to identify an area in which they would like to add antennas. A site acquisition agent then canvasses the identified area, seeking a suitable location to build a new tower for Verizon's antennas. Get a special use building permit, and the money flow begins. If there happens to be an existing structure which could accommodate the new antenna location, the antennas would be placed on the existing structure. Co-location is successful and no need to build a new tower. However, if an engineer representing the existing structure determines that co-location is not possible or the lessor disagrees to co-location, then there would be a case to consider issuing a special use permit. One of the items Central States Tower needs is the statement from a qualified engineer indicating co-location cannot be provided at the possible existing co-location sites, or evidence that the lessor of the possible co-location site disagrees to co-location on their property. We were told that Verizon contracted with Central States Tower to build a new tower on the southeast side of DeKalb. This new tower would make money for three parties. Central States Tower, by renting space on their new tower, first to Verizon and to other wireless carriers in the future. Verizon, who will share in the future rentals to the other wireless companies on the new tower they financed, and the landowner, who receives monthly rental checks amounting to a minimum of $10,000 per year for 50 years. The contract, already signed, is worth a minimum of $500,000. In all likelihood, the accountants of Verizon are looking at least 50 years down the road, as evidenced by their signing a contract with the landowner. If you build and live in your own hotel, you have the opportunity to make additional money by renting the other rooms in your hotel. That is a far better financial arrangement than having to pay rent and stay in the hotel next door or down the street. Verizon and Central States Tower want to build a wireless antenna hotel and reap huge financial rewards. Our code clearly states they need the room next door at the AT&T Suites or in the penthouse atop the Taylor Street Plaza. This is a wireless industry chess match, each company trying to stay a step ahead of the competition. The same scenario recently played out at Fairview and Annie Glidden. Verizon financed the new tower and is sitting only part way up the new monopole. They are very anxious for their competitors to rent space on their pole. Build your own monopole and cash in as your competitors are forced by city or county code to seek you out for co-location. What were the initial actions of the petitioner? We were told site acquisition agent Michael Duchamp, on behalf of Central States Tower, approached James Hovis in February of 2014. Without obtaining city approval for this prohibited building project, Central States Tower signed a lease with Mr. Hovis and began investing in site development for a new tower on the Hovis property. Central States Tower stands to take a business loss on capital they have prematurely invested in site development costs prior to obtaining a special use permit for construction. The city code required Central States Tower to participate in a special use permit pre-application conference to review all the codes and requirements prior to being placed on the agenda of a planning and zoning commission hearing. Central States Tower did not meet the pre-application conference requirement. Central States Tower did not conduct a good faith co-location analysis. They did not seek successful co-location on the adjacent AT&T Tower, the Taylor Street high-rise, or the Blackwater Tower. A successful co-location would make no money for Central States Tower or the landowner. It should be noted that the then chairperson of the Planning and Zoning Commission was currently renting space in the building owned by the petitioner. A recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission to the City Council would be a definite positive step for Central States Tower. Nevertheless, this item was put on the Planning and Zoning Commission agenda for its first public hearing on November 12th, 2014. Some of the commissioners are newer members and may not have had the opportunity to watch past meetings on this topic or read the minutes of those meetings. For your consideration, in the decision you are asked to render, I would like to offer a review of the first petition request and its first public hearing, November 12, 2014. The city's recommendation noted that all the request requirements were not met. The petitioner failed to provide the co-location feasibility study required in the Unified Development Ordinance. Central States Tower's representative, Michael Duchamp, claimed that their application was most certainly complete. They needed to provide nothing more. When asked to present the missing co-location feasibility study results and a document from AT&T stating that co-location on the AT&T Tower was not possible, Mr. Duchamp tried to convince us that anyone in the wireless business would recognize that co-location was not permissible on this AT&T structure. His reasons included no AT&T representatives would return his phone calls. 2, the AT&T Tower is a landline tower, technically not possible to accept co-location. 3, there's no space at the bottom of the tower for the equipment shed. And 4, AT&T has no mechanism to process applications. The city's position was that the co-location protocol was not met, pending the applicant's duty to conduct a good faith co-location feasibility study. We needed a statement from a qualified engineer indicating whether the necessary service can or cannot be provided at the AT&T Tower. The Planning and Zoning Commission granted Central States Tower 28 days to complete the co-location feasibility study, including looking into possible co-location at the Taylor Street high-rise. Between meetings 1 and 2, we found that AT&T does accept applications for co-location. We also found that the Verizon Central States Tower team actually requested a letter of denial for co-location from AT&T. Why would they do that? If co-location is successful, Central States Tower and the landowner will not make any money. Verizon would meet its goal of new antennas where it claims to need them, but not the future income from other wireless companies. If AT&T would supply a letter of denial, it would satisfy the co-location feasibility analysis for that site. On the AT&T Tower's website homepage, there is a bottom right screen link, co-location process. This is the AT&T co-location process we were told did not exist. It states, if you're ready, simply download our co-location application. This is the mechanism Mr. Duchamp told us did not exist. This is the application process needed to determine if the AT&T Tower is, as Central States Tower claims, unavailable for co-location. This is the co-location protocol required by the DeKalb City Code. On November 19th, Central States Tower CEO Brian Meyer belatedly sent out the required letters to identify which parties own structures within 1 mile of the proposed site for possible co-location. Central States Tower themselves identified the radius distance of 5,280 feet. In an email communication with the city dated December 2nd, 2014, Central States Tower representative Michael Duchamp states, quote, "Even if it fit location-wise into Verizon Wireless's maturing network, I've been told there is no room at the inn regarding another carrier on the rooftop of the 10-story building to the north, the Taylor Street high-rise." Mr. Duchamp did not specify who told him there was no room at the inn or document why it did not fit location-wise. Again, Central States Tower had designated the 1 mile radius. Mr. Duchamp addressed the AT&T situation, quote, "Per dialogue at earlier hearing, AT&T Wireless couldn't crack the corporate maze to possibly co-locate on the existing AT&T landline tower and has its equipment on the tower south of town. In tight fenced-in compound, there is no room for wireless carrier equipment shelter." Between meetings 1 and 2, we found that AT&T does in fact accept applications for co-location, and further, Verizon was requesting AT&T to bypass the co-location application process and simply issue a letter of denial which would satisfy the city requirement. More came to light as was revealed to us at the December 10th meeting. Near the beginning of this continuation, Attorney Frieders presented the city's position as follows. Quote, "When this petition started pending before the Planning and Zoning Commission several months ago, the petitioner had not undertaken co-location investigations to determine if it was possible to co-locate, and we don't believe the petitioner had satisfied the requirement that they be able to assure the city that all reasonable accommodations for co-locations have been investigated. They," referring to AT&T, "were never approached with an actual good faith request or inquiry regarding co-location." In the AT&T emails, they indicate that Verizon chose to never submit a formal application, that they, AT&T, have an application process for co-location, and no application was submitted. Attorney Frieders then questioned Mr. Duchamp, "Was an application submitted for co-location, and if so, can you provide a copy of that to the Planning and Zoning Commission?" To which the representative replied, "There was not an application submitted because most of the time that is not our typical protocol." Central States Tower position was the co-location feasibility analysis was complete. They handle it differently than the city protocol requires. To pursue co-location on the AT&T tower was, in Mr. Duchamp's words, an exercise in futility. Regarding the Taylor Street high-rise, somebody told him there was no room at the inn. Co-location feasibility analysis notwithstanding, Mr. Duchamp summed up Central States Tower's position, quote, "I think we've met certainly the vast majority of the requests with a wealth of information multiple times. You know, at some point, you just have to take a vote, make a decision, and move on down the road." The city's position was that the co-location protocol was not met, pending the applicant's duty to conduct a co-location feasibility study. We still needed a statement from a qualified engineer indicating whether the necessary service can or cannot be provided at the AT&T tower, as well as the Taylor Street high-rise. The Planning and Zoning Commission granted Central States Tower an additional 63 days to complete the co-location feasibility study. Between meetings 2 and 3, December 10th, 2014 and February 11th, 2015. Between these meetings 2 and 3, Verizon Wireless does finally submit an application to AT&T for co-location. During this time, it was learned that the then chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission was renting space from the petitioner in the very building on the site of the proposed new tower. This revelation raised the specter of at least the possible public perception of a conflict of interest, which is a violation covered in the Planning and Zoning Commission's Code of Ethics. Planning and Zoning Commission members shall abide by a code of ethics as follows. Point 3, when concerned that there is a potential appearance of a conflict of interest or a public perception of conflict of interest, the commissioner should recuse him/herself from the particular proposal. After 63 more days, the third meeting to consider this request was reopened. Meeting number 3.
Mr. Lehman, I'm sorry, with all due respect. All of our commissioners were at their original opening meeting for this petition and heard a lot of this information or read it in the minutes. So I need to ask, do you have any additional information that you may be providing us? Or can we get to perhaps an end of this particular petition? Not an end, I'm sorry. Get into the comments about this particular petition?
Yes.
Is there more comments that maybe we haven't heard? And if not, can we move into this petition?
I appreciate that, Chairwoman. I was just trying to do this for the benefit of those who had missed meetings.
I understand, and they were all at the very first meeting for this petition and heard this information that you had given us then, and were able to read it as well.
Okay, so you would like me to skip ahead to this petition?
Please.
Okay. Bear with me a moment, please.
Sure. Not that it's not interesting, or it's not out of respect, but we have heard a lot of this. And now, not to confuse you, if you would like to go back one slide and start there, you're welcome to. The in-between, yeah.
Oh, thank you. All right. Okay. The co-location with AT&T continued but was never completed. A building permit was issued for the ground equipment facility, but Verizon stopped all progress in February of 2016. Determined to build a new tower on the site they have literally bought into, it could be that Central States Tower looked at the changes in the DeKalb political landscape. These changes might provide the opportunity needed to obtain the long-sought special use permit. There's a new city planner, a new mayor, some new alderpersons, and some new planning and zoning commissioners. Experience shows that public opposition wears down over time. The time might be right to try again. Central States Tower once again filed the same special use permit application over 2.5 years since it first appeared on the Planning and Zoning Commission agenda. The petition received its first hearing August 23rd of this year. Central States Tower's arguments were no longer that co-location on the AT&T tower is not possible, but rather co-location would cost more than Verizon would like to pay. Verizon accountants have decided that a non-negotiated cost estimate for co-location with AT&T proposed in February of 2016 was more than they were willing to approve. Furthermore, Verizon's future revenues from renting space to other wireless carriers wouldn't materialize. Therefore, Central States Tower should be granted a special use permit. During this meeting, the possibility of co-location on the rooftop of 507 Taylor Street was again presented. There is not only available space on that roof, but a completely empty platform in place, ready for new antenna placement. That is a definite cost savings if all you're looking to do is place antennas in the air within 1 mile of the proposed site. However, this co-location option was dismissed by the petitioner. The reason he stated was that the high-rise was outside the effective RF search ring. This is in your pack. However, if we look at the letters sent by both Central States Tower CEO Brian Meyer in November of 2014 board packet, and the letter written and sent by Richard Riley himself in July of 2017, which is in your board packet, they request the respondent to identify a co-locatable structure within 5,280 feet of the proposed site. The Taylor Street high-rise falls within the ring identified multiple times by Central States Tower. And yet, somehow we are told the Taylor Street site doesn't fit. Central States Tower's position is, 1, co-location on the AT&T tower, while possible, has been stalemated since February 2016 by Verizon's financial administration. 2, co-location on the rooftop of 507 East Taylor is outside the search ring. 3, Photoshop pictures illustrate the new tower would be hardly noticeable, visually and aesthetically acceptable within the surrounding area. The city's position was that the co-location protocol was still not met pending the applicant's duty to complete the co-location feasibility study. The result would be a statement from a qualified engineer indicating whether the necessary service can or cannot be provided by co-location at the possible location site or on the Taylor Street high-rise. The Planning and Zoning Commission granted Central States Tower 42 days to bring in a representative from Verizon and AT&T. Mr. Riley presented to the Commission and citizens Photoshop pictures of the proposed cell tower with Verizon's one platform, which is specified to be at 128 feet. Each picture contained a disclaimer. The pictures he brought should show something more like this, which is what the new cell tower would look like along South 7th Street. The tower is filled with other carriers' antenna platforms as projected. I think many of you may find this, which is an actual photo, something other than minimal, not exactly blending into the Midwest sky and landscape, as we have been repeatedly told. Between the 5th and 6th meetings, Central States Tower indicated they needed even more time to get representatives to appear before the Commission on September 20th. However, needing still more time to complete their application, the September 20th meeting was continued to October 4th. At the request of the petitioner, the October 4th meeting was continued to this evening, 1,092 days since the first hearing. Tonight, the petitioners are here again, at no small cost, to persuade you to endorse their proposal to build an unnecessary, unattractive, but highly lucrative eyesore. Successful co-location on a structure not owned by Central States Tower is the least desirable outcome for them. For the city of DeKalb and its citizens, co-location would be the proper and just compliance with the Unified Development Ordinance. As was stated in earlier meetings, financial considerations to petitioners are not to be part of the permit approval process. This special use permit request is still incomplete in regards to items specific to number 1F. On a separate piece of paper, indicate whether or not the proposed use would A, be in conformance with the city's comprehensive plan, and how the proposed use may B, impact adjacent existing and land uses, C, impact adjacent property values, D, impact the general public's health, safety, and welfare, and E, be in conformance with all elements of the Unified Development Ordinance. The petitioner has successfully completed a co-location feasibility analysis for the AT&T tower and has submitted a formal response. You have this in your pack. From that response, section 7.08.09, item number 4, the petitioner has A, received the required statement from a qualified engineer indicating service can be provided by co-location, and B, the lessor agrees to co-location on their property. The co-location feasibility study confirms that Verizon may successfully co-locate on the existing AT&T tower. There is no justification for issuing a special use permit to the petitioner to construct a new tower. We respect your extreme patience and deliberations in this matter. Our hope is that your body will consider the actions and the results of the petitioner and find that recommending approval of a special use permit to Central States Tower would be contrary to the stipulations of the Unified Development Ordinance governing new cell tower construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hamilton White?
Hi, my name's Deanne Hamilton White.
Just a little bit lower.
Okay, yeah, I have that problem a lot.
Me too. Thank you.
I'm at 614 Spring Avenue in DeKalb. Mine's just a simple, I shouldn't say simple question because I'm not sure I can know how to word it adequately, but my question comes around the new technology of devices that are going to be small enough that they are being considered to put them on public utility poles. In fact, there's even legislation in the state on whether or not a community can control these kind of devices. And whether that legislation ever gets passed or not in this state is not my point. My point is that it is something that needs to be considered. It's technological innovation that is coming. So my questions come from, if these antenna, these smaller antenna versions, are put on public utility poles that are in the 7th Street, in that area, are those going to interfere with what is on the monopole? Is it going to interfere, or will they no longer make what's on the monopole necessary? Would they replace what is on the monopole? And if they do replace what is on the monopole, what happens to the monopole?
Tricia's coming back up.
That's it.
Okay, to answer your questions, yes, we can, in places like City of Chicago where it's densely populated, we can put smaller antennas on street poles or utility poles to cover that intersection. But this area, DeKalb area, is nowhere near any urban setting like City of Chicago, where you just want to cover just an intersection. So to replace this cell tower with utility poles, this one cell tower, we will need maybe 15 to 30 utility poles to cover what we can cover with the cellular tower.
But would it be more economical for Verizon to use that kind of technology because it's
Not
miniature?
necessarily. I don't think it's the dollar amount. It's what is needed at a certain place for the customers.
And you're saying that it would work in Chicago, but DeKalb isn't in the same category, which definitely. But I know there are communities such as Burr Ridge, which is fighting the possibility of this legislation that would not allow communities to have some say in whether these antennas that are being put on utility poles, et cetera. So that, I think Burr Ridge is a less dense population than Chicago. So I don't know why Burr Ridge would be concerned about that if they would be more qualified for it than DeKalb is.
I'm not following. What's
I'm-
Burr Ridge
I'm-
doing?
I'm sure I'm not saying it very well. It's me. But if communities such as the size of Burr Ridge are wanting to make sure that they've got some control over where these antennas are put on public utility poles, to me that says that a community the size of Burr Ridge might be facing the aspect of these antennas on public utility poles, and Burr Ridge is not a huge metropolitan area any more than DeKalb is.
Burr Ridge is still very close to Chicago, and I think the population of Burr Ridge is more than DeKalb. So you cannot compare Burr Ridge with DeKalb. I think we cannot, and they have different rules, different set of rules, and different challenges. So I cannot speak for Burr Ridge.
Okay, and I have no idea what the size of Burr Ridge is. I just happened to be reading that article recently, so that's the reason I brought that one up.
Okay, so
you're saying that DeKalb would not be a candidate for this type of technology?
not right now, unless the demographic changes, our population changes.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I can briefly interject here. So
Yeah.
I guess to the extent that it's relevant, the population of Burr Ridge in the 2010 census was about 10,500. And to your question, ma'am, the city does have two other companies that are currently exploring with the city the potential of installing the small cell devices in the city to meet bandwidth needs at various locations in the city. So there are some companies that are viewing that as an appropriate technology to deploy here. And we are currently working through that process and evaluating that technology.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So kind of as a follow-up to her question then, and my understanding what Tricia is saying, just, excuse me. So are these, I'm going to call them mini towers, and mini
Sure.
antennas, whatever they're called.
Sure.
So is the concept of these to fit a smaller area or location area so that you were mentioning an intersection, for example?
Intersection, they're gonna go on a light pole, maybe 20 feet.
So if we were to talk about South 7th Street, for an example, hypothetically, and put it, let's say, at the corner of 7th and Fairview, although that may be not a very good example, maybe 7th and Harvey, would that then, like that area that it would cover, what is the coverage area
just
for
that
something like that?
intersection.
Okay, so it's not something that would be broader and go
No.
a large section?
No,
So you
they
may
are
need
not
5 of
capable.
those to cover a section of Karen
5
and
of them
7th or whatever?
to cover maybe 1 block.
Okay, great. That, just for perception, that helps me a little bit, so, good question,
So-
though, thank you.
Madam Chair, with respect to the other companies that we're working with, what we're being advised is that in a high-traffic corridor like Sycamore Road, for example, or along Lincoln Highway, they would look at a spacing of between 500 and 1,000 feet per unit to handle the bandwidth in that area. And in lower traffic areas, the separation between units could be slightly greater than that, but because they're lower, to the petitioner's point, they have a shorter effective range.
Sure.
So it's a combination of the amount of traffic and the height of the tower that you'd evaluate. But we have not had any companies propose to put them closer than, in the highest traffic areas, 500 feet, and typically closer to 1,000-foot separation.
Okay.
And that's just based on the other two companies that we're currently working through that with.
Okay. I needed to get that visual of what the encompassing area would be, so, okay, thank you. Ms. Larkin?
Hi, I'm Donna Larkin at 432 Karen. Just a few things that I was noting. First of all, with Dave's presentation, I agree with everything he had to say. We have 2 potential co-location sites identified. They are definitely tall enough to be able to enhance the area. And according to the city guidelines, we should be using a co-location first and only going to building another tower only if it's an absolute last result, if there's just no other resort available. The cost for building that new tower, we don't even have a good idea of what it's actually going to cost. This thing could actually nickel dime to the point that it's way above the estimate for going over to the AT&T tower. I mean, it could become a really big problem once all the costs start being identified. And you hit that total button and you realize you've already spent more money than if you would have just went with the AT&T tower to begin with. And we do have those two sites. We have AT&T, we also have the high-rise. I'm not sure why that we are even looking at any other options. And I know Central States, you know, they've been a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit deceptive along the way, you know, saying, well, no, there's no possible opportunity to do this, and providing numbers that just kind of keep moving. We have a radius that's moving. We have no idea if it's the mile, which is what was originally said and was said in numerous documents. Then we're at 0.7 miles. If you go on a tower that is 300 feet high, you're going to have a little bit better coverage, according to our our Verizon individual. If we go even halfway up that tower, we're going to be at the same height. We should have plenty of opportunity to have signal. I live close by. I have no problems with my phone. I do have Verizon. I don't have problems. I also, on my way to work, I drive along Fairview and drive quite some distance. I don't have any problems with my phone there either. I know people that work at Panduit, people that work at Nestle, people over at 3M. When they're outside of the building and they go to their cars to make phone calls during their breaks and their lunches, they have no problems making calls. They have no problems with drop calls. So I think that aspect of it has really been exaggerated, that that's the reason for this. I think the reason for doing this, like Dave mentioned, it's all about the dollar. And I think, you know, if you want the dollar, even though that other price over at AT&T is a little bit more money, and possibly, you know, they may be very close. We don't know that yet. The bottom line is it's the same way when you go to the store. Either you want the item or you don't. If you want to increase your coverage, you want better reception for your customers, you have to spend the dollar. Verizon makes a lot of money. I know that every month when I pay my cell phone bill. They make plenty of money. So this isn't about money just for Verizon, it's for the other stakeholders. Everybody's out there to get a buck. But it's going to be at the, I guess the neighborhood is going to be the one suffering for it, because it's going to be our property values that are effective. And also, the picture showing what this tower may look like. When you look at that fine print, that it may vary. I don't like to order anything online that it says, well, you know, maybe this is what you're going to get, maybe it isn't. It may vary. I want to know what I'm getting. And when you look at that picture on Dave's slides where there was a tower that does have the different carriers located there, it's hideous looking. And supposedly, you know, it's not going to be a big problem to have this other tower there at the proposed site. Well, it's not a problem for Verizon. It's certainly not a problem for Central States, because they don't have to look at it. We're the ones that have to look at it. So I'm sure it's not a problem for them. Please take into consideration that There's no reason to be doing this. And we really depend on you to make a good, sound decision based on all of the information you've seen and heard, and keep in mind all of the, numbers that have kind of keep changing and we don't know about, because we don't know what we're buying into. And I'm sure you have no way of knowing that either, because we don't really have anything concrete to look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Duck?
My name is James Duck. I live at 1307 South 7th Street. I am the home directly across the street from the proposed tower. And once my leaves continue to, or complete falling off, I will be greeted by this tower every time I go out to get my mail with a direct line of sight to it. I'd like to note that I have never once received any notification about these proceedings or about this matter from the city of DeKalb. Matter of fact, the only letter I have ever received to date came from Attorney Riley back in July. And so forgive me, I'm playing a little bit of catch up here. When I bought my home 2 years ago, September 2015, I had great concerns about the big red tower that was across the street, and I almost didn't purchase my home as a result of that. It was my realtor investigating it and assuring me that there was no cell communications on that tower that helped with my decision to close on the sale. That being said, I've looked into a little bit of this since I've been notified by my neighbors of the situation and the petition. And, like most people, I was concerned about, I'm going to get brain cancer from the cell tower. So I looked into that, and American Cancer Association assures that there is no risk unless you are standing directly in front of the receptor. So that concern was eased. The other concern I had was, does it comply with village code, which I am fairly ignorant to, but after Dave's miraculous and immaculate presentation, if there are only two requirements written in the code for co-location, an application and a denial of co-location, it seems like the matter is pretty clear that whatever the cost to the petitioner has no bearing on it. If this is village code, that the possibility to co-locate is there, an application has not been denied, that really should be the governing factor here. But that being said, we have to take into consideration the unsightliness and the homeowner concern for decreased property value. I'm not exactly sure where the statistics or facts you are getting about property values increasing. Maybe that's just a very painting with a broad stroke, but every time I've looked at my home value, I purchased 2 years ago for $150,000, and everything I look at now has it ranging from $142 to $136. So my property value has gone down despite my many improvements to it. What I am here to say is that I oppose this petition for one thing above all else, and that is the seemingly fixated nature of the application for this particular address and location. Now, again, I'm playing catch up. I read the 178 pages at the link provided for today's packet. I've seen the information. And if the search ring is the ultimate consideration to help the customers receive better signal, I'm wondering why this tower would be put so close to the dividing line between zoning of light industrial and residential. I will be able to see this thing every time I step out my front door. But according to their own search ring, unless I'm getting it wrong, there is still approximately about, if I had to guesstimate from my point of view, 500 to 700 feet either east, northeast, or southeast. that would put this an additional 700 feet from residential sightline. It would decrease its visibility from the street, from anybody's window, and all things considered, let's just say all things are equal, that the two estimates from the petitioner and the verified estimate from Pyramid, from the city itself, let's just say those numbers are accurate and take construction into account. The consensus is it's only going to cost about $171,000 to build a new tower. Again, if the information is correct about construction costs. So that's going to be your cost whether you put it at this applied for location or 700 feet back further into the industrial district on a different property. It would seem that if your cost is the same and your only real pushback since 2014 has been the community and fear of property value decrease, why not simply build your tower 700 feet further away from the residential property lines and the zoning boundary between residential and industrial? So that is my concern. It seems like there is something under the surface as to why this particular location, especially after Attorney Frieders pointed out the tower right by 88 that has never been looked into. The request, which was granted by Attorney Riley for an alternative within a mile of the proposed site, and he was given one within his own requested mile radius, and now suddenly that's not good. So to me, the changing information and the lack of investigation into sites further back or any of the existing co-location opportunities, that tells me there's something else going on here, and for that reason, I'm going to oppose. I'd like to voice my opposition to the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience. I've noticed you've all been paying close attention through this long evening.
Can you put, yep, thanks.
Okay.
Microphone.
When I spoke to you the last time, I emphasized what I thought was important that you bear in mind, that you are acting in a somewhat of a judicial capacity here. And the information that's being conveyed to you, that you need to consider whether it is valid and legitimate evidence. And I know Mr. Riley's not going to like me talking about evidence again. He didn't like it the last time. But let's consider some of the statements you heard tonight. Mr. Riley told you police departments will tell you that 80% of 911 calls are via cell phone. What's that based on? Is there an article in the Police Gazette? If so, where is it? Mr. Riley will tell you that the data shows they have many dropped calls in this area. Where's the data? I assume, data to me means factual material. Is there a printout? Is there a record of complaints? I haven't seen it. I don't think you've seen it. Mr. Riley called Tricia from Verizon as a witness. And then he did something that he wouldn't have been allowed to do in a court of law. He asked her a series of leading questions. If you go back and think about what happened there, Mr. Riley stood here and testified, and Tricia, simply said yes, yes, no, no to what he said. Those are leading questions, and that's not valid evidence. That's a lawyer testifying. comments might be made about credibility of lawyers, but we won't go there. Another thing that concerned me was the reference that Mr. Olson made to his study of the property assessments on 7th Street. The valid way to measure the effect of the AT&T tower on the assessments on 7th Street would be to go back and look at them before the tower was built and then relate those figures to modern day dollar values. I don't think that was done. The reason, and I think Mr. Lehman illustrated this pretty thoroughly, so I'm not going to belabor the point. The reason they don't want to co-locate is because they lose the opportunity for additional income from other carriers. The petitioner here is not really Verizon. It's the tower company. They're the ones that want to put this tower in this location so that they can rent a space to Verizon and also rent it to other carriers in the future. This, as I understood it, was a continued hearing. Yet when I got here this evening, I heard much of the same testimony and argument from the petitioner that I heard the last time I was here. So I hope as the evening wears on, I don't have to hear it a third time. And I want to speak to the phrase that City Attorney Frieders used. He spoke in terms of other options that have a lower impact. Deanne mentioned this potential legislation allowing for these small wireless facilities. Specifically, what she was referring to was Senate Bill 1451 in the Illinois legislature. It was amended several times, and we're really on the 4th amendment. The bill was passed by the Illinois Senate. Let me pull up the date here. On May 24th of this year, and it was passed by the House yesterday, November 7th. It hasn't been signed by the governor, but I assume that he will sign it. We will then have legislation that permits what is called small wireless facilities development. And there is your alternative. The whole reason for this co-location argument is the underlying assumption that cell towers are to be avoided if at all possible, so that your community doesn't look like a porcupine from the sky. And this is the way to avoid that. So you do have an alternative. I suggest that you explore that and that you deny this application. And again, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you. Before I go to the commissioners, is there anyone else who has not spoken that would like to? Okay, I'm going to give the commissioners an opportunity to ask any questions or state anything. And I will start down with Vicki.
I have a couple of questions. To Tricia, what is the actual coverage area that this new proposed tower is designed to handle? Is it the immediate area, or is it taking in a lot more of the county?
First, it is to cover the immediate area, and then the south of the area, which
How
is
far?
the 88.
Okay.
88 and north and south on 23.
Okay. How far south, approximately?
From the site, 88 is maybe a mile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we pull those maps up
Okay.
again on the board?
Byron,
The
can you?
control room put up the first presentation that was made.
Thank you.
That might help in the discussion.
I guess my question was, initially, I was under the impression that the building of this tower, while it would enhance the local service, is also for the future for the southern part of the county. Is that correct? And if so, how far south?
Southern part, where you can see 88. South of the south side, it's the 88
Okay,
and 23,
okay.
the intersection.
I have a couple of other questions for Mr. Riley. Upon completion of the build of this new tower, is the tower owned by Verizon or CST?
The tower's owned by CST.
And then it's rented to Verizon?
That is correct. I'd like to make a couple distinctions between the parties here, because it's been brought up, and they talk about them like they're one and the same. It's not the case. It was Verizon who obtained the permission to build on the AT&T tower. It is Verizon that couldn't come to terms with AT&T. CST had nothing to do with that. But when Verizon couldn't make the deal with AT&T, then they came back to CST, say, hey, we need a tower. So,
Okay.
essentially.
Do you know, and you may or may not, if Verizon has had any interest from other cell carriers for renting space on this tower if it is built?
It would not go to Verizon. Verizon could care less
It would
about
go to
that.
CST then?
It would go to CST, and I do not know whether or not they have had any other inquiries. I could find out, but I don't know now.
I'm just out of curiosity. Can you, and I know it would be a generalization, but if you were to construct a tower similar to this, regardless of where, taking into account we don't know the soil and whatnot, what's the average cost of a monopole that you build that's this height?
It's exactly what has been submitted by your consultant and by the two bids from AT&T. It approximates $170,000, to build a new cell site. And
So if CST were to go elsewhere, you're looking at about $170,000?
that is correct.
Okay.
With regard to that issue, this is very important. We had two co-location protocols. One was the tall building at Taylor Street, which you've had direct testimony, and the other one is the cost of locating on the AT&T tower. If the board tells me that they understand the difference between building a tower and co-locating AT&T tower is $269,000, then that's what your consultant says. I'm cool with that. But there's been a lot of confusion about co-location and construction. The estimates you have from Pyramid are about constructing a new facility. They call it co-location because AT&T would co-locate on that structure. But the numbers that you see there, the breakdown, is for building a new tower. And the two bids that were submitted were for building a new tower. These are not, not co-locations, building a tower. If Pyramid was here tonight, and it's a shame that they're not here tonight, I have absolutely no doubt that they would concur with that. But that's a very important point. So if this commission has any doubts about that, then please, continue the hearing with only one issue, and that is the construction cost on the AT&T tower. Because if you don't believe that there's a $269,000 differential, then, we have lost that point. And that's important. And if you believe that $269,000 is a sum that Verizon should pay, well, then we simply disagree about that. But I don't want there to be any confusion about those numbers. Thank you about
Thank
that
you.
point.
That's all I had.
Deborah?
If I could just very briefly respond, I'm sorry, just before we lose that point. The city disagrees very vehemently with that position. And we would note again that the Pyramid report talks extensively and repeatedly about co-location at the CST tower, and the Verizon pricing talks about co-location and expressly excludes the tower erection, the tower foundation, any engineering associated with the tower, installation of the tower. It simply excludes all of those costs. And to that point, many of those items are listed on the cost estimate and have no value next to them. The tower foundation, the tower erection, the tower crane, these all are blanks. We do not believe that cost includes the cost of erecting the tower, And there is no basis in the pyramid report, if you read through it, to believe that it includes the cost of erecting a new tower.
Okay, if I may respond to that, I'm reading right from paragraph 3. It says typical steel platform, antenna structure, $30,000, typical electrical, $35,000, typical cabinets, $10,000, engineering, $3,000, management, $15,000, asphalt work, $10,000. You don't have asphalt if you're not building the site. You know, typical landscaping, you don't have landscaping if you're not building the site. You know, typical security area, that's fencing we're talking about there. Civil work, $10,000, engineering work. This is a point that can be clarified directly with testimony from your own witness. And, you know, if necessary, I'll bring in CST, who can talk about construction costs. Earlier, we estimated the construction cost of the cell site to be somewhere around $125,000 to $150,000 when I first came in here. But this point can be run down. There's no need for us to be confused about it, you know, and it's important, because if in fact, like you're saying, that it is an error, then we're not entitled to co-locate or not entitled to build a new tower. But this co-location protocol, there's only 2 issues, the Taylor Street building and the AT&T tower. So our petition should be denied if in fact, you know, we can construct or go on the AT&T tower for the same cost. We can't do that. It costs $269,000 more, which your consultant does say. And I'm sorry, but he mixed the words with co-location and construction. He shouldn't have, but he did. But we can cure that. Just bring him in, get an affidavit from him. You know,
And I
that's
guess
fine.
we would simply disagree. There are many times when co-location would require engineering, would require asphalt driveways, would require fencing. When you're installing a new equipment shed to house the equipment for a given manufacturer, when a new cell provider comes in, they may need to extend driveways. They certainly would need to do site engineering, put up their own shed, do their own foundation work for that shed, put their own security fencing around that shed. And to that point, I think some of the AT&T cost estimates for the co-location at the AT&T tower included some of those costs, although they recognized that the existing access to the site didn't require improvement or further paving.
Why don't you simply inquire of Pyramid what the costs are? He's your consultant. Why don't you bring him in and ask him that question? Because it's important. You can continue it with that one issue, no discussion from the audience, no discussion from me. Just bring Pyramid in. And I'll give you a list of questions to ask him. You know, do it. You should do it. Because what you're saying is you're confusing everybody by saying that, you know, these numbers are not accurate. And they don't cost, and by the time we get done constructing the tower, it's going to be almost the same cost as going on the AT&T tower, and that's not accurate. That's not accurate at all. So,
Just for the record, I'm simply noting what is and is not in the documents that
yes,
you have submitted.
I understand that. Thank you.
Deborah, I'm sorry. Did you have?
The only comment I would make, because I've already asked the questions I had, is that putting aside all the issues on costs, what would be our preference for this tower? Would it be a new tower, or would it be co-locating? And I think from the past discussions that this commission has had and past actions, it has been co-location. And that's my consideration, is what is best, what is preferred plan of action, disregarding what the cost to the company is. If it's but for the cost, they won't do it. But for the cost, would we be asking them to do something else? That's all I have.
Dave, you're next.
I'm going to piggyback in part from what fellow commissioner started here, and I'm going to express a few points. One of the depositions here highlighted the fact that we have a judicial duty. I would call it a quasi-judicial duty, among other things, because we don't have formal processes for challenging testimony and back and forth. We certainly hold some hopefully healthy level of skepticism for what we hear. We think about it, we analyze it, and we make the best decision we can with what we have. One of my main concerns with this situation is that allowing one tower would establish or set up the precedent for the rest. I.e., we're going to become a city of towers. And in a way, we are one of the gatekeepers of that process. We're not the only gatekeepers, but we're one of the gatekeepers of how eventually our city is going to look. And I am certainly not interested in having a large number of towers around town. I have a technical question. I apologize in advance if I am saying your name incorrectly.
Trisha.
Bouillon. Ms. Bouillon.
Trisha Bouillon, yes.
Okay. I'm looking at these maps, and I think the previous map is a little bit more instructive to me. Are you the person in charge of developing these maps?
Yes.
I guess the main question that I have for you is, do you have a map that would show the coverage similar to the upcoming slide if you were to install that antenna on top of the building on Taylor Street?
Yeah, I can produce that.
You do have that map?
I don't have it with me, but I can produce
You
that.
don't have it with me, but you could produce that map.
Yes.
So as of right now, we don't have that map. Could you comment on how that map would look relative to this map, for example?
It will show, it will not look like this. It will not have the blue area that you can see right now on southeast corner.
Okay. Are these antennas directional?
Yes.
They are directional.
3 directions, yeah.
So the antenna that you're proposing to place on this monopole will be directed at the west?
There's 3 directions. It's 3
3
sectors,
directions.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they will be directed at what directions? I'm just curious.
You can see right now it's directed, one direction is northeast, another one is southeast, and another one is just west.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
If I may comment,
Yeah.
just as I'm looking at this map again, you can take a look at this. You can see that we have what they call distributive sites, DAS at the university, that's distributed antenna systems. It's not that Verizon doesn't deploy distributive antenna systems. They do when you have a concentration of population, pedestrian traffic, and you really need to bring a lot of, bandwidth into a small area. But there's a big difference between a macro cell and between these small cells and the DAS. And this legislation that was talked about, that is a huge right-of-way issue, for municipalities. It really has no bearing on what we're doing here tonight. But anyhow, I don't mean to digress, but I mean, you can see that we use different antenna systems in different areas.
All right. Thank you. I have a third point that I want to raise, and that is, it has to do with money, and it's a little bit of a different twist to what my fellow commissioner brought up a moment ago, and that is somewhat I would be interested in having a Verizon business representative here. I understand you work for Verizon, but you're a technical representative, not a business representative necessarily. And the reason I bring that up is because companies like Verizon and many big companies in this country and around the world are very concerned with their branding. And the truth is that if we end up with this monopole in the city of DeKalb, this is absolutely, I think, not a good start to the relation between CST, Verizon, and the city of DeKalb. Branding at this point is not good. Verizon is not looking good here at a minimum. And the question is, what is the value of that branding to a company like Verizon? I don't think anybody here is able to answer because honestly, I see Mr. Riley as a representative of CST.
Correct.
Not a representative of Verizon.
Correct.
You may argue the opposite.
No,
but,
I'm not. I would agree with you.
Oh, attorneys can argue anything. You're good at that. Even when a dog is not a dog, you would argue that it is a dog or not. I would be, again, very, very interested in seeing what a Verizon business person, a Verizon representative concerned with the image of the company would say about the current situation. Is very unfortunate in many ways. What I'm hearing from the city of DeKalb is that there is a completed protocol, co-location protocol. I took the time to go into our UDO, and it concerns me, and I want some clarification on this one. It concerns me that the words that I find here, and I'm going to read directly from think it's page, let me make sure that I'm reading the right place. I think it's page 713 in our UDO. The city of DeKalb recognizes that co-location is preferable where technologically feasible and visually desirable as a matter of public policy. And that's the part that I want to emphasize, as a matter of public policy. Is public policy an ordinance? Is it the same?
I think as that ordinance is drafted, the policy behind it is one of the factors that led to the development of that policy, and that policy is intended to help guide the decisions of this body. You evaluate a number of zoning factors, their impact on properties, on specific properties, and on the public at large, and make a recommendation. And public policy is intended to help guide that consideration, help guide that decision.
Okay.
But the ordinance itself is the regulation. Public policy was what formed, or what was the basis of the ordinance.
Correct. So in that sense, all that is required from the applicant is to complete the protocol for co-location, not necessarily to co-locate. Is that a correct statement?
Well, the process of co-location develops a set of information that is submitted to the Planning and Zoning Commission so that you have a fully informed view of the factors that you are to evaluate as part of this decision. So it may be the case that you go through the co-location protocol and determine co-location is completely impossible. There is no other tower within a radius needed to provide service. In that case, co-location would have zero impact on the factors available. It may be the case you go through the process and determine that there are already 7 towers in very close proximity, all of which could easily be utilized, and the installation of an 8th tower then may have a disproportionately adverse impact on surrounding properties, or may have a disproportionate impact on one of the factors that we're evaluating as a part of a special use. So compliance with the co-location process is required. The information that comes out of that is intended to inform your recommendation to the City Council regarding the application.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Before I move forward, according to our bylaws, we are after 9 o'clock. I need to ask for a motion to extend at least an hour.
So move.
So moved by Mr. Wright.
I can second it.
Second by Barbie. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Okay.
So I want to piggyback a little bit on the previous remarks. And this is about the public perception of Verizon. And what I just did, for me, the most logical thing, I looked at the Verizon website and I looked at their coverage map. And I looked at very closely at particularly this area, and it's all red, meaning no really good service. So, but you're telling us that you don't have good service there, but you're advertising that you have service all over. I know you're not in the advertising business at Verizon, but that's something that concerns me, that we're hearing that there are frequent trouble tickets, but it's not, like in Verizon, it shows as white if you don't have coverage, and it's not even pink in on the map. And also, if you look at the summary that we got, it seems to me from all the discussions that there is not unreliable in-residence coverage. I mean, I went past that street today. I don't have Verizon, I have T-Mobile, but I had LTE at all places. So T-Mobile somehow reaches there from, I guess, the building on 4th Street. So if they can do it, I was wondering why can't we do it? And then the one answer we got from you, I was not really satisfied with. It just said, well, this is how it is, or something. I want to have like a real reason. Why is there no coverage?
I can't talk about T-Mobile.
No, not T-Mobile.
No.
I'm talking about Verizon now, sorry.
When did I say there is no coverage?
Well, I wrote it down, sorry. Well, the whole idea is that we need the tower there because there are a lot of frequent trouble tickets and customer complaints. and that the residences and the businesses in the area have poor in-residence coverage. And it seems to me from all the discussion I've heard that this is not the case. I mean, you live right there, right? I mean, I drive past it, so I don't have Verizon, but I still get service.
We're not saying that there is no coverage. There is coverage, but what kind of coverage and quality of coverage, and that also depends on capacity. When you have more and more people making calls or download or use the internet, so the coverage or degrades. So that's why we need a site right there to improve the customer experience, especially speed on internet. So there is coverage, but what kind of coverage and at what time, and depends on how many people are there. So right now at 10 o'clock, maybe there's no issue, but maybe at 5 o'clock when it's rush hour, it can degrade.
Yeah.
So to address those, we need another cell site there.
So then I think then what would be important is to actually get the data, the statistics on exactly how much coverage there's, how many calls you've had, and at what times. I'm sure you have that available.
We have that information, and we don't share that information
we're
with
at an
others. No,
impasse in
that
a
is
way.
proprietary, and we
Yeah.
don't share that information.
Because I hear from people who live there that they don't have any problems with the coverage.
Right. I don't know how many people you talk to, but we have other
I live in that
information.
area too. I live
Right.
a little bit outside of the area.
That's not under my control.
Yeah.
How many people you talk to or who you talk to. But we have
But then if you're not
information.
willing to share that, I'm sorry.
I cannot control what information you have, but what information I have, that's my design, and based on that, we have came up with this design.
May I comment on this issue?
Sure.
Thank you. You know, it always fascinates me if they're building an electrical substation, the engineers come in and tell you what they need, where it has to be located. If we're building a pumping station for water, they come in, they tell you, where it has to be located. McDonald's comes in and says, hey, we need to build a site here. Nobody ever questions the engineering, except when it comes to this subject here. And if this tower was underground, nobody would be questioning the engineering again. But, we accept all the engineering from other sources, but when it comes to RF engineer, we all like to say, hey, you can go over there, it's not a problem. You can go on top of that building, it's not a problem, the same height, you go a little bit higher, go 100 feet higher. Everybody likes to play RF engineer. And it really, there's been a lot of testimony tonight, and it's specific, right, that, we wouldn't be making this effort, based upon faulty engineering. And the relationship, what gets confusing between Central States Tower and Verizon, Central States Tower does not have the RF engineers. We have to depend upon our customers coming to us and saying, hey, we need to be here, which in turn is dependent upon the engineering studies that are done. And they are proprietary information. Nobody likes to disclose that. And you're absolutely right. Advertising versus the real world, I'm sure the engineers are always playing catch-up, right, But they know that the signals are degrading. She'll tell you, she knows as time goes on, all the new instruments, all the new capacity, everything that's going on in the world is all mobile. And we need to be able to build to address it, that's all. So
Well, I agree with you, but I'm still, as a commissioner here, it's also my duty to look at everything that we hear here, and if you cannot share certain things, then that is in a way to your disadvantage, because you need to be able, we need to make decisions on the basis of facts, and if we cannot get all the facts, then it is really hard to make a good decision, and if that's proprietary, I completely understand that, and I'm not an engineer. So, and I don't even play one on TV, so.
This is tough. I mean, I typically I always want the next new technology. I want the Xbox One, all that stuff, and I'd like to see my community progress that way too. When we look at these cell towers and coverage, and I want to be progressive And in light of what we have in front of us with the UDO and how we're trying to regulate, I mean, it makes it tough. And hearing from the community and trying to stick to the nature of what we've placed in writing here, it's just a tough decision. So that's all I have to say.
Madam Chairman, if I would like to make just a couple of closing remarks, and then I'm finished. Right? If you were at that point in time, I think
We're
probably
not,
are.
actually.
We're not? Okay,
No.
sorry.
No, I haven't spoken. Not that I have anything much more to say, but everybody has asked the questions and spoken the thoughts that I have had. I just want to make one point of clarification for the record. Mr. Lehman had made a comment in his presentation that it was us in the city that wanted to bring the Verizon rep in, and I said this that night, that this was something that the public wanted, as well as us. So it was not just us, and I needed to make that statement. So we have made our comments. I have to give one more chance for the public to speak, and then I will let you finish, and we'll finish any questions that we may have to the city or any other comments. So if there is anyone else in the community that would like to speak, in the public that would like to make an additional comment that has not been stated, you're welcome to come up to the podium. Or if you have any further questions that have not been asked. Yep. And just I know you've said your name and everything, but we have to ask you again.
Dave Lehman, 621 Karen. I just had another question for Tricia. And it concerns the actual antennas that we're talking about. And I saw on the blueprints, both for the AT&T co-location and for a new tower from Central States, that the antenna selected is from Amphenol.
Okay, yes.
Okay, and the model number, Amphenol? Yes, AMPHENOL Antenna Solutions, and they're located in Rockford. And the model number, CWWX063X19G00. I inquired about that antenna.
Okay.
And I was told, when I asked, how far does it cover? And the gentleman, Kevin Hiatus, responded that it's a tough thing to give a specific. He said, but on average, that antenna covers between a 2 and a 5 mile radius, and that it can be boosted to go as much as 10 miles, again, given different variables.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
Again, I'm not sure who you talked to, and again, it depends. Again, it can cover 10 miles if you have a 300-foot tower. So it's not like I am covering 10 miles with the information that we gave you. So that is why it depends on where it is.
So
what's the height of the tower?
The height of the
and
tower.
what's the power? What's the input power? There are a lot of things that goes in the background.
Right.
That determines how far a cell site can go.
So that if you had the availability to go 250 feet in the air, that
Yes.
would extend that coverage much farther.
In a rural area, maybe that's what it's needed, but not at this cell site.
Okay, but his statement of as he told me, it was a conservative estimate of 2 to 5 miles. You would agree with that?
Again, 2 to 5 miles for what? At what height? I cannot just tell you, yes, 2 to 5 miles. It has to be at what height, what area, where is the location. So it's a lot of things dependent, and what kind of equipment, what kind of input power, what kind of band we're talking about, what technology we're talking about, what's the spectrum we're talking about. So it depends on that. Is it on 850 or 1900 or the 2100 or the 5 gigahertz? So it depends on the frequency too. So,
But it's adjustable then. There are parameters that can change the coverage.
exactly, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I'm Donna Larkin, 432 Karen. I just want to kind of piggyback on what Dave was just talking about with these antennas. If it's conservative, maybe 2 to 5 miles, if, for instance, we were just to go just a little to the south of your location that you're wanting to build, with it being 300 foot, if we were to place their equipment, or put your equipment there at about 250 feet, would it be safe to say that you could cover probably 5 miles, or maybe even, because it's nice and straight and we don't have a lot of obstacles, we could even maybe go out possibly 10 miles?
But that's not my objective. My objective is not to cover 10 miles for
Well,
this
why
south side.
wouldn't that be your objective? Because this is what our concern is, that you don't have the coverage that you need out at this distance.
Because it's not about covering 10 miles. Every cell site has a limitation. You cannot, one cell site cannot serve the whole DeKalb. That's why we need more cell sites, right?
Right,
You can
but if
say,
you can
I can
cover
cover 10 miles, but it will only provide coverage to maybe 100 people. That's not what we want, right?
I'm
Why-
sure it isn't what you want, but
That's not
from
what I
a...
want.
Oops, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So what is your question? Can you?
Well, I'm trying to find out, why would you not want to cover 10 miles? Because you would need fewer towers if you could cover greater distance.
It will cover, why do I want to provide coverage far away 10 miles when it's going to be very degraded signal quality? We want to provide good quality coverage and quality coverage to our customers. I mean, when you're on your car and you're on the station and you go farther away from the station, do you hear clearly? No, right? So farther away you go from your radio station, it degrades. So why do you want a degraded coverage? Why do I want to provide degraded coverage to my customers?
Well, you possibly would not be providing degraded coverage because you have these other cell towers all through the country. A radio station is locked into a particular location in which, yeah, as you drive further away, it is going to, at some point lose signal.
Right.
But as you move from place to place,
Right.
you pick up the other Verizon towers that are in all these other places. So if you have one tower that can go out 10 miles, there's no way to measure or even expect, you're assuming that it's going to be a lesser quality signal or more degraded, and we don't have any data that shows that that could be the case.
I'm asking for 125 feet on this tower, and I cannot cover 10 miles with that height. We are not even proposing a high tower. So I don't think your question is valid for me. I'm not saying we want to cover 10 miles. I'm only asking for 125 feet to cover the area that I already said that we want to cover, 88 and 23.
Okay, but you're saying that's the area that you want to cover.
Correct.
If you were to co-locate on the AT&T tower, first of all, you're not building another tower. You can go up higher and you can cover that bigger area. Of course, you as a Verizon company, you want to continue to keep building more and more towers. I don't understand why you want to keep increasing the number of towers when you could have less towers and cover a greater distance.
No, that's not how it works. We just don't keep building and keep building. If there is a need, if the population grows, if there is a capacity need, add capacity, that's when we need another cell site. We just don't keep building and building just for nothing. We build it when there is a need.
Why would you want to cover a very small distance versus a larger distance and have to keep building?
Why? Because maybe at a small distance, I have more people making phone calls or downloading data. That's my intention right here. I don't want to cover 10 miles away.
But just because you don't want it doesn't mean that the neighborhood wants to cover a lesser space. And I'm hopeful that maybe everybody else can see the fact that you're trying to just cover little areas. You want to cover over by 88. Oh, we need another one here. We need another one there, instead of just building one that can go out a greater distance. I think it's all about money, and it's very unfortunate that that's what, this boils down to. Thank you.
Thank you. One more call from the public, and then I will go back to.
Jim Hovis, the owner of the property, and I'd like you to clarify at least my interpretation of some misunderstandings I thought I heard. One is that I think I heard Tricia say that if he puts the tower up and tries to expand the width, maybe 100 people would get good reception, but if you expand too wide, you can't service 1,000 people from one tower. If I heard her correctly. She's nodded yes to that. Second, early in the discussion, we heard about the best point for the tower being a spot which Verizon then defined as a quarter-mile radius around that point. And so the key thing is you can move a quarter mile from that point in any direction, which is 440 yards. So you lose it if you try going 700 yards, but yeah, maybe you can go 300 or 400 yards and make it okay. But it's not fair to say the diameter from that point is 700, is a half mile. Therefore, you can extend from that position a half mile to get closer to the 16-story building. The quarter mile is what matters, not the 7/10. You should be comparing the quarter mile to the 7/10 of a mile, not the half mile to the 7/10. A statement was made about the value, to me, the owner of the property, for something where I'm getting $10,000 a year in rents. That's locked in. That $10,000 a year is locked in for 50 years. I'm paying $52,000 a year in taxes on that building. Those taxes are going to go up forever. That rent's not going to go up. It's very hard to make profits in that building. It hasn't been profitable in the last 3 years because it has to have a high occupancy rate. And yet, I didn't go to the city for subsidies to do the building. I put a couple $1 million into taking and fixing up a building, and I have to get renters in there. And so I'm hoping we can get, this is $10,000 a year will help. But it's certainly not a windfall for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Riley, I believe you had just a few comments, if there's anything new that has not been said.
Yes, indeed.
Because the
Thank you.
commissioners then need a chance to discuss.
I want to go back one slide so people can take a look. Maybe we can explain it's a grid system. You know, if you build a tower that's 250 feet high, you're going to interfere with all the surrounding cells. They all have to reach out and touch each other, blend. It's a grid, and that's what makes it work. You know, we had a lot of discussion tonight. We've talked about policy. We've talked about a million things. But when it comes down to making a decision, you have standards. And it's those standards that apply to the decision, with the exception now of the co-location protocol. If we don't comply with the co-location protocol, then you're absolutely right. Our petition should not be granted. However, if we do comply with the co-location protocol, and of course it's our position that we do, then we look to the standards to see if we meet the standards. And if we meet the standards, then we should be approved. If we don't meet the standards, not so. So we should take a look at the standards. We have already. I did it earlier tonight. Mr. Olson did it earlier tonight. And guess what, folks? We comply with all the standards. It's not our ordinance. It's your ordinance. Yes, policy underlies the drafting of the ordinance, but the standards come into play. And that's what you're held to. That's what I'm held to. That's what everyone is held to. So if you make a decision that we are not complied with the co-location protocol because the $269,000 increased cost to go on the AT&T tower is not sufficient, okay, that's a decision. But if you agree that we have met that co-location protocol with the AT&T tower and we've eliminated the Taylor Street building because of RF issues, that leaves us then with the standards. And I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that we do meet the standards. And I have one comment to fellow attorney, Mr. Larson, I believe, right? You know, he's talking about judicial protocol. Clearly, there's been a lot of evidence submitted tonight that is hearsay that would never be admitted in a court of law, you know, on both sides maybe. But anyhow, thank you for your attention. I know this has been difficult. But this is an important site, you know, and just a 4-year period of time, the need is growing and growing and growing. You know, that's why we're back again, period. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I open questions or any other comments from the commissioners. Whoever would like to go first. Actually, I'm going to go first because I have a question.
Go ahead.
For the city. So one of the photos that I think Mr. Lehman had put up that I just don't drive in that area and pay that close of attention. So frankly, I don't notice these cell towers. But the cell tower that's down at Annie, Glidden, and Fairview. So I'm guessing that that tower is outside of the city, or it would have come here. But I was trying to tell in the picture, do you happen to know, and you may not know, was that required to be painted, or is that the galvanized?
I'm not sure. That was built in unincorporated DeKalb County, so that went through the county. I'm not sure the exact treatment on that.
I was just curious because it did blend in some, and I have noticed the towers when I've traveled on the interstates or I've been out in other areas, and to me, the color of those really is insufficient, but they do kind of fade after time, and so I was curious if that was white or if it was just the galvanized. So, okay, that was a more curious question. Thank you. Katarina, do you have anything else? Jerry? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. One moment, please. Do you have anything? Okay. I have not closed the public hearing, so I did see one hand go up. You're welcome to come to the podium. Please state your name and your address.
Hi, Tony Hines from 258 Ralph Road. I wasn't really going to speak because I think people have made some very clearly presented comments and as to our concerns. about this procedure. But after the last comment by Mr. Riley, I felt I had to come up here because I feel like it's very troubling to me, at least, that he would lecture the commission about following the rules and the standards when we have been here for almost 3 years now trying to resolve this situation. And in the very beginning, from day one, CST has shown disdain and disrespect for our rules. Initially, not even attending or arranging a pre-conference, which is right in our rules. Then later, presenting it that there was no opportunity for co-location, which was a flat-out lie, as we found out later, that they had that AT&T had never even been contacted and requested, and that they were on board for that possibility. So I hate to be up here saying something negative, but I feel like it's important for the commission to know, especially those of you who weren't here since 2014, that this has been a long journey. And when Mr. Riley says, we have done everything and you should stick with the standards, that this is extremely misleading because of how this process has actually taken place. I feel that it is that he has totally misrepresented how the situation was presented, how CST went through, or didn't rather go through, the process as we have in our rules, and how over a 3-year period with all these postponements so that they would eventually present the accurate and necessary information that we requested. And so anyway, I just kind of want to remind the commissioner that this was a very misleading statement, and it is CST, as far as I see it, that over these years has been either reluctant to present information or has flat out misrepresented information, and now we find ourselves, I don't know, possibly postponing again. But anyway, I just needed to kind of say that I feel like this is a really serious misrepresentation of how CST has presented and arrived at this night. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could take money for every time somebody has talked to the commission like that, we'd probably clear the budget. So they're not the first one, so that's all I'm saying. You got to make light sometimes. So, commissioners. Does the city have any further statements?
No.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Just a quick reminder, if you do recommend denial, if that's going, as I mentioned earlier, the findings need to be adjusted accordingly for the report, so.
And before we vote, I have not closed the public hearing, just in case somebody recommends that we extend this another meeting for more information, so I will have to close public hearing before we vote if
I have a question.
you decide not to do that.
Can you explain what you meant by findings would have to be changed?
The findings of fact under the standards of special use, starting on page 9, there's 5 findings of fact.
Okay.
They're in the affirmative approval, factual information.
They've each been met, is what you're
So-
saying. And if we choose to vote to deny, we have to explain why?
Yeah, you have to adjust the language in these to be more supportive. We've
Okay.
kept some kind of points if you need help on. I think we've drafted up here.
That
if
answered
you
my
do that.
question.
Yeah.
And Dan, what page are those findings of fact?
Page 9, it starts on page 9.
Okay.
Here, you want mine?
The standards of special use?
Correct.
Those, yeah. We need to decide on a motion of what we're going to do next or continue.
Do we have to close first, the public hearing, or no?
Yeah, you have a couple more questions out there. if you're
Once
not
I
closed.
decide, once we decide if we're continuing or not, I can't close it if we're gonna continue it. So. Yes, if there's something new or a new question that has not been asked yet.
William Oleckno, 1622 Sleepy Hollow Lane, DeKalb. The special use permit petition requires on a separate piece of paper to describe the proposed user's characteristics, such as operating hours, number of employees, etc. And it also says, indicate whether or not the proposed use would be in conformance with the city's comprehensive plan. Could someone on the city staff tell me whether or not that has been complied with? Have they provided information showing conformance with the city's comprehensive plan?
The comprehensive plan just strictly mentions for that site just the land use, which is in light industrial. It's on the staff report. It doesn't, there's no land use category regarding cell towers or, so the comprehensive plan in terms of this issue just designates a land use for this particular location.
Okay, but that is part of the application. Was something provided in to respond to that? Did the applicant or the petitioner provide
I don't recall there's anything
a
in
statement
writing.
that they had conformance with the city's comprehensive plan?
I'd have to go back. I don't think there was something specific that
Okay.
the statement said there. Huh?
That they submitted.
That they submitted.
Okay, that does tell me they have not complied with all of the requirements. There are some other things here, but that's the only one I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Did you want to go over those?
I guess our recommendation would be to make kind of a preliminary decision about whether you wish to continue the hearing or not. If you do not wish to continue the hearing, we'd recommend closing it, and then we can get into a more detailed discussion on the findings, options with regard to the findings, and options with regard to your recommendation.
It is my wish not to continue the
Yeah.
public hearing tonight.
Is everyone in
Agreed.
agreement to
Agreed.
that?
Agreed.
I just want to confirm that Principal Planner Olson doesn't want to object to that.
I do not object to that.
We are closing the public hearing. Okay. So what we have in front of us now is to figure out a motion that will, our findings of fact that are presented to us as we wish, or would the motion and require us to change the findings of fact, or adjust the findings of fact.
Maybe if he gives
Correct.
direction or discussion if you're leaning favor or against, and if it's favor, they're here. If they're against, Dean has drafted up some maybe points that you could maybe discuss further, so
What
might be easier.
To Commissioner Buckley's point, the findings that were in here were contemplating approval. That doesn't mean they're necessarily the correct findings. It was just the memo. What we have done in the past where the commission has reached a conclusion contrary to what the memo contemplates is we've talked through some of the high-level points, and then the commission has made a finding and authorized the chair to sign a set of findings of fact consistent with that recommendation. So if the commission decided to make a negative recommendation, we would talk about how some of the factors, what the analysis would be, and then we'd recommend that you authorize your chair to sign a set of findings consistent with that. The memo itself outlines the sort of the foundation of the findings that would be in support of a positive recommendation. If the commission was inclined to consider a negative recommendation, the elements that we would consider, that we would recommend consideration of would be the first, so going through those 5 points, the proposed special use complies with all provisions of the applicable district regulations. We would review the application and consider the testimony that was just offered regarding whether the statement of compliance with the comprehensive plan was submitted. And we would also note that there are certain amendments that are recommended as conditions. Those conditions are indicative of the plan not fully complying with the UDO in some ways. So for example, the plan does not include landscaping or screening that the UDO requires. The second factor is proposed special use having an unreasonably detrimental impact on the value of other property in the neighborhood. The commission received testimony on both sides of that, but certainly received testimony from individuals who have recently gone through property purchases in that area who testified that the presence of existing towers had an impact on property values, and who testified that the installation of additional towers would have further impact. The third of the 5 points is the location and size, the nature and intensity of the operation involved in or conducted in connection with it, the location of the site with respect to streets giving access to it, if the special use would dominate the immediate neighborhood so as to prevent development and use of neighboring property. The commission did receive testimony that multiple towers are deleterious, that it's certainly preferable to limit the spread of multiple towers, and that there are existing towers in the area in very close proximity that are very visible. The commission also received testimony and saw some photographs regarding the impact that additional tower installations would have at this area, and testimony from surrounding property owners that they believe it would unduly dominate the immediate surrounding. The fourth of the 5 points is utility, drainage, and other necessary facilities have been or will be provided. Again, the UDO contemplates the presence of certain landscaping and screening that's intended to be a way of addressing some of the concerns that a facility such as this poses, and those have not yet been proposed. And then the fifth would be the proposed use where such developments and uses are deemed consistent with good planning practice or can be operated in a manner that is not detrimental to permitted developments and uses in the district, can be developed and operated in a manner that is visually compatible with the permitted uses in the surrounding area, shall in all other respects conform to the applicable regulations of the district in which it is located, and is deemed essential or desirable to preserve and promote the public health, safety, welfare, and general welfare of the city of DeKalb. So we've discussed compliance with the UDO or non-compliance. We have received resident testimony regarding the presence of adequate cell service in that area. We heard the indication from Attorney Larson that the petitioner has not provided any objective documentation of a challenge or problem with cell service. And we heard information that the Verizon website has a cellular coverage map that discloses that there are no coverage limitations in that area. So those are the kind of things that we would look at including in a set of findings if the commission headed towards a negative recommendation. And again, if you're looking at a positive recommendation, we'd recommend focusing on the outline that is in the staff memo.
So one question or some clarification, because there was another situation since I've been on the commission, where we had the findings of fact we had to vote on. Can you please remind me, and then for the purview of all the other commissioners, when we vote on the findings of fact, voting in the affirmative and the non-affirmative?
So, it's an excellent question. At times in the past, the Planning and Zoning Commission has voted in the affirmative if they wish to manifest support for something, and they have failed to vote in the affirmative if they wish to not manifest support for it. That has been, we've received feedback from the public and from the city council that sometimes is confusing. And so as we've discussed this with respect to some more recent petitions, what we've recommended is you look at it as a little bit more binary, where if you want to support it, you recommend approval, and if you don't wish to support it, you recommend denial. So you're making an affirmative motion either way. I move to recommend approval, or I move to recommend denial, and it's very clear then, a yes vote on denial means you wish to have it be denied. A yes vote on approval means you wish to have it be approved. It just creates a clearer record that's a little bit more understandable.
Great, thank you. And we can't do one finding of fact is in the positive and one finding of fact is in the negative by pieces. It has to be as a whole.
No, you certainly could go through the findings and make findings either way. From a defensibility perspective, I suppose I'd say consistent findings of fact are
better.
They're more defensible if there were a challenge. But I would encourage you to make findings that you believe are consistent with the evidence that was produced, regardless of the impact.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
I have one more question for you, Dean. And just to clarify, as I'm new on the commission, and this seems to be something that's gone on a long time before I was here, once we're done, if we vote to approve, it goes back to the city council.
this action would go back to the city council.
Okay.
There are some very limited actions that this body makes a final decision on, but this permit is not among them.
And the city council is ruling on what?
The city council would have an ordinance before them that would grant the special use, and so they would make a decision to either approve that ordinance or not approve that ordinance. So if they approve it, the special use permit is granted, the petitioner could go forward with building permits. If they don't approve it, then there is no special use and the zoning would not be authorized.
And they get it regardless how our decision is tonight.
That's correct.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Do we want to go through each finding and discuss it? How do you want to go about this? As a whole, as discuss where you're leaning and then go through each finding of fact?
It's nearly 10 o'clock.
I know.
I'm going to make a motion, and so I'm suggesting that I'm going to make a motion, and then we go through the findings of fact, on the standards in particular, I'm sorry. Based upon the submitted petition and testimony presented, I move that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend to the City Council denial of the special use permit for 140-foot tall cellular communications antenna at the subject property located 1300 South 7th Street.
So the motion in play is that we deny the request.
Correct.
And an affirmative vote on this is to support the denial.
That's correct.
Correct.
Has not been seconded, correct?
It has not been seconded, that's correct.
Correct.
So you need a second on that? I'll second it.
So the motion is in play by Castro and seconded by Neer. Discussion. And this is where we need to adjust the findings of fact, correct? based on recommendations and testimony that we've come up with this evening, or we can just do a straight denial on this, we can do a straight vote on this denial motion.
So what
That's
we
where I'm
would,
confused, I'm sorry.
what we would recommend is, I think you have really two options here. Option one is the motion can encompass authorization for you as chair to sign a set of findings that are consistent with the testimony presented.
Okay.
And so we as staff would go back through all the testimony and prepare those, and they would be similar to what I've outlined for you. Option two is we can go through all of the findings individually tonight and hammer out what the findings are in whatever level of detail the commission wishes. So we can pursue either of those options.
Option one.
I vote for option one.
I agree.
I can't vote on that, that's your guys' decision.
So
Yeah, it's-
there
it's
isn't
a
a
proposal.
motion that's
Yeah.
before the commission to that extent, and I know,
Vote is the wrong word here. but-
right.
Right.
So
a
we
motion.
customarily, we customarily try not to do amendments, but this might be in a circumstance where if that's the commission's preference, that there be an amendment, a motion to amend the approval to include the authorization for the chair to sign a set of findings consistent with the commission's decision.
So should
I got lost.
either one of us amend it,
Any,
ask for amendment?
any member of the commission could make that motion.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
So as amendments work, we would have a vote first on the amendment to see if the amendment passes or not. And then depending on the outcome of that, we'll have a motion on, a vote on the underlying motion.
So the motion in play is, the amendment in play to vote on is the allowance of the city to come up based on the testimony with the findings of fact, and they're allowing me as chair to sign the findings of fact.
Right, so you as chair would be approving and signing them, yes?
Correct.
Correct.
And we've got a motion and a second, correct? Motion by Neer, second by Buckley. Roll call?
Commissioner Wright?
Yes.
Commissioner Neer?
Yes.
Commissioner Kroll? Commissioner Castro?
Yes.
Commissioner Buckley?
Yes.
Commissioner Barbie?
Yes.
Chair Atherton?
I abstain as chair.
That motion passing, then the motion now is a motion to recommend denial, inclusive of the authority of the chair to sign a set of findings of fact consistent with the testimony and presentation this evening.
And do we have to have a new motion in play, or is that based off the
The
motion by
motion is now
Castro?
amended and is in
And-
play as
And we've
stated.
had the second, and we can
Correct.
vote. So, the motion is the denial with the amended wording of the findings of fact being approved and signed by myself.
And to Commissioner Buckley's point, a yes vote means recommending denial.
Okay. Yes vote means recommending denial. No vote is against
Means
that
approval.
denial.
Okay.
Or roll call.
None.
Commissioner Barbie?
Yes.
Commissioner Buckley?
No.
Commissioner Castro?
Yes.
Commissioner Neer?
Yes.
Commissioner Wright?
Yes.
Chair Atherton?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I want to thank everyone in the public who has come to speak out on this over the last 3 years. Feel like half of my life on the commission, actually. And also to Mr. Riley and Central States for having come and everything, all the input that has gone into this, including the commissioners, since we've been through 2 commissions on this, 2 separate groups, basically. I think 2 of us are the lone people left from the first time. So, reports.
Reports, next meeting is November 22nd, which we'll probably cancel. It's the night before Thanksgiving, so we'll send out that notice next week. No items on that. The next meeting is, after that's December 6th.
Great.
Then after this in January?
We do have another meeting scheduled for December 20th, if we have an agenda item. Unless there's some, maybe we'll pull the commission a little bit later, see if we have a quorum or if that's going to be needed. We have no items scheduled for that yet, but that's a second meeting scheduled for December.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you again, commissioners, for hanging out on this and being present. So I will be happy to take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
So moved by Wright.
Second.
Second by Buckley. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.